Chapter 621, Where is he? Saul repackaged the little girl, hung her on his back, then opened the door to investigate. The corridor was empty. He darted out of the room, his figure immediately becoming a phantom rushing forward. Before finding the little girl's room, he had passed the corridor leading to the tower. It was only because the little girl's commotion attracted him that Saul chose to enter the third floor. This magnificent manor was also decorated very elaborately, with many ornate but impractical furniture pieces. For example, the corridor Saul was now running through had black iron openwork tables standing in the middle. These small tables could at most hold a miniature fruit bowl. Now all the tables were completely empty, serving only decorative purposes while obstructing Saul's running path. Just as Saul reached the end of the corridor, he heard several hurried footsteps at the corner. He quickly pressed against the wall, his entire figure blurring and almost merging with the champagne-colored wallpaper. However, the footsteps approached and then receded. But Saul didn't see a single person. Yet the wind stirred in the corridor, seemed to indicate that a group of people had indeed hurried past. Did the pursuers also turn invisible? Saul couldn't help but peek toward where the footsteps had disappeared. Vaguely, he seemed to see the departing crowd. Not crude clay figures anymore, but real people. But in reality, he actually saw nothing. Only an empty corridor with its magnificent decorations. Coming back to his senses, Saul shouldered the cocooned little girl and turned to climb the stairs leading to the tower. Are you certain the thief hasn't left the manor? Lucy crossed her arms, standing in the messy room. But through observation, she discovered that what caused the current mess was likely not the thief, but these servants hurriedly searching for their madam. I'm very certain he couldn't possibly leave the manor. Two identical female butlers said with serious expressions. After the butler shouted about the enemy attack in the banquet hall, Lucy and Redbeard simultaneously stepped forward, offering to help find their madam. After several second-rank wizards discussed, they decided to split up, which would allow them to thoroughly search every corner of the manor for the Storm Eye's existence. This manor wasn't large. 6 people splitting up took only 10 minutes to thoroughly search the place. However, an unexpected result emerged. They not only failed to find traces of the Storm Eye, but also couldn't find the thief who had stolen the manor's madam. The female butlers were obviously dissatisfied with this result. Their expressions grew increasingly serious, their eyes so gloomy they seemed ready to drip water. Normally, every wizard present wouldn't care about these 2 people's emotions. But now they were inside Old Day's manor, temporarily stripped of all their power like ordinary people. In this situation, they might not be a match for these 2 strange female butlers, with a high possibility of dying under pollution-enhanced rules of the borderland. Unless they could find a way to break the situation and escape Old Day's manor's constraints. Lucy looked at the dim scenery outside the balcony. How long have we been here? The sky seems to have remained unchanged. She extended her hand outside, but touched an air wall less than half a meter away. She turned back to Redbeard and others who were studying a small bloodstain on the floor. There's a barrier about half a meter outside the balcony. With our current strength, we can't break through it. Brando didn't approach but stood behind the group. This manor is completely sealed, which is why those 2 butlers said the thief couldn't possibly escape. Dula impatiently tapped the ground with his staff. But we've already turned the entire manor upside down and found no thief at all. Lucy pondered. Could it be that there's no thief at all? Everything is the 2 female butlers acting, or the madam herself secretly ran away. Kismet had been crouching by that pool of red blood, staring at it with interest, as if it were actually an interesting painting. He looked up, smiling at the others. Who do you think that thief is? The others exchanged glances. all simultaneously picturing the same person but tactfully not saying his name. So, Redbeard frowned, internally disliking this very possible answer. On one hand, he hoped to quickly crack Old Days Manor's secret, find the Storm Eye, and seal it. Based on this psychology, he hoped Saul was that thief and would break through Old Days Manor's rules soon. But when he thought about how Saul had been invited by them, he worried whether the other party would take the opportunity for revenge. At this moment, he desperately hoped the thief was actually Blue Hair. But the other party had been completely silent since being kicked out. Blue Hair had somewhat tentatively tried to go upstairs then, but unexpectedly, after just one insistence, they directly expelled him from the manor. If it were someone else being expelled, it would definitely be more bad luck than good. But Redbeard had cooperated with Blue Hair for years and had confidence in his abilities. But having confidence that the other party was alive didn't mean believing Blue Hair had the energy to steal the mistress here. Brando was happy that Saul had made a breakthrough. He believed Saul definitely wouldn't take away the mistress here without reason. However, with the butlers present, they couldn't speak directly, so Brando only asked, "What do you think the thief wants to do by stealing the manor's madam?" Lucy suddenly remembered something and turned to ask one of the female butlers, "Are there any secret rooms or passages here that only your madam can enter?" The two female butlers shook their heads in unison. "No, this manor has no secret rooms or tunnels, nor any places only the madam can enter. Everywhere the madam can go, we can go too." Everywhere? Lucy was somewhat puzzled. If everywhere was accessible, then their earlier search had no blind spots. Where exactly was the thief? At this moment, the mummy wizard who had been standing silently at the door turned and left the room, while Redbeard and Lucy continued discussing where Saul might be. Kismet suddenly lost interest in the bloodstain on the ground. "He never appeared from the beginning. Maybe he's not in the same place as us at all." He spread his hands to the others. "Group action is meaningless now. Let's split up to find ways to break the situation." The group action suggestion had been Lucy's. She believed that if they found the Storm Eye, they'd need everyone's combined strength to seal it. But these second-rank wizards obviously wouldn't obey like Stargate Council wizards. Lucy looked at Kismet, who appeared leisurely and carefree as if he'd really come to attend a banquet, suppressed her inner dislike and nodded. "All right then, let's each act separately to find a breakthrough point. We can't maintain the status quo forever." Just then, a black shadow suddenly burst from outside the balcony, heading straight for Lucy. Though Lucy sensed movement behind her, her physical strength was constrained and she couldn't dodge in time. Banged! At the critical moment, Brando threw a punch, directly hitting the black shadow attacking Lucy into the wall. Splat! That black shadow stuck to the wall like mud in a radiating pattern. Simultaneously, Redbeard grabbed a nearby chair and thrust it hard into the wall, pinning the black shadow that was trying to break free. "This is bad, this is bad." The two butlers stood side by side, expressionless, their voices without any inflection. "If we can't find the madam soon, the manor's barrier won't be able to hold back the demons outside." Chapter 622, Displacement. Saul dragged the little girl and quickly ascended to the top of the tower. But when he reached the topmost floor, he discovered it was completely empty. There wasn't even a single chair on the ground. The floor was dusty gray, completely at odds with the manor's magnificent style. Not only that, Saul didn't see any anomalous objects either. He freed the little girl's mouth again. "Why isn't there the anomaly you mentioned?" The girl stared wide-eyed ahead. "This isn't the tower top." Saul was puzzled, but the stairs had ended and there were no other floors above. Whether using meditation techniques or the Eye of Banishment, Saul saw no other rooms. He jumped directly to the overhead wall, feeling along the wall's crevices, trying to find physical mechanisms. But he still found nothing. This wall's texture is quite nice, feels much more comfortable than the tower top's floor. This tower was decorated so strangely, actually arranging the ceiling so exquisitely. This made Saul even more certain there must be mechanisms here. Unfortunately, the little girl was completely unaffected by threats. When Saul pressed her again, she just giggled and said, "This isn't the tower top." Saul was somewhat confused, feeling like some thought was flickering in his mind, but he could never grasp that clear point. Just then, Saul heard someone approaching. The new footsteps weren't hurried and carried a hint of cheerful leisure. Step by step, approaching the tower top. Saul again hid with the little girl in the corner. But when the footsteps reached the last step, Saul still saw no one. Saul's brow gradually furrowed, but he made no sound and didn't emerge from the corner. The invisible footsteps wandered around the room for several minutes before leisurely leaving. Just as Saul was about to reveal himself, he heard a second set of footsteps. These footsteps belonged to another person. But Saul still couldn't see the second footstep's owner. As if the visitors to the room were ghosts, existing in a world of the dead that Saul couldn't see. These footsteps are somewhat strange. The first footsteps were light and ethereal, making it impossible to pinpoint where in the room their owner was wandering. The second footsteps were much clearer, but such clear sounds made Saul even more confused. Saul slowly raised his head, looking at the overhead wall. A thought hidden in his mind for a long time gradually became clear. He stopped hiding and emerged from the corner, but didn't remove little Algie and the girl's disguise, still keeping them hidden. Saul alone, maintaining high vigilance, slowly walked to the room's center. Later, he didn't even hide his footsteps. When Saul deliberately stepped on the ground to make noise, the second person's footsteps, which had been wandering in the room, suddenly stopped. As if someone had noticed something, stopped their original movement, remained quiet, and listened intently. Saul deliberately took a second step. Thud! The footstep echoed in the empty room. Tap, 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 tap. Saul's footsteps completely startled the second person, but their reaction was unexpected. They actually ran away directly. Completely unlike the reaction pursuers should have. Saul didn't chase after them. He kept looking up, as if watching something very interesting. Then he pulled backward, bringing little Algie and the girl hidden in the corner to his side. But his gaze was still fixed on the overhead wall. I know why the second person's footsteps sounded strange. The little girl blinked her big eyes without saying a word. Though receiving no answer, Saul's gaze toward the little girl was very certain. He said softly, "The second person's footsteps came from the overhead wall." Thinking carefully now, the first person's footsteps weren't very clear, but they should also have come from the overhead wall. Saul looked at the little girl, saying word by word, "Those two people just now were walking on the ceiling." Saul recalled the obviously strange places he had ignored along the way. It's not that they were walking on the overhead wall. It's that I was walking on the ceiling. So those black iron tables in the corridor weren't tables at all. They were chandeliers hanging from above. So the overhead wall felt better because that's where the stone floor actually is. Saul flew up, pressing himself against the overhead wall. From this angle, this room isn't the tower top at all, but the tower's bottom floor. Saul returned to what he perceived as the ground. Am I right? But the little girl seemed to be playing dumb. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Anyway, my treasure is at the tower top. Heh. Saul pressed one hand on the little girl's head. Then let's go to the tower top, which is what I perceive as the tower bottom. Saul had little Algie wrap the girl into a cocoon again, then dragged her and turned to go downstairs. In the man or madam's room, a humanoid black shadow suddenly appeared. After failing to ambush Lucy, it was pinned to the wall by Redbeard. But this was just the beginning. Before everyone could study the black shadow's composition, second, third, and fourth shadows shot in from outside the balcony like arrows. The group, still unable to recover their spellcasting abilities, could only fight back or dodge using objects in the room. At this time, one female butler's head was covered by a black shadow monster. Since the female butler was a key clue figure in this manner, Lucy, Redbeard, and others immediately went to rescue her. But after they used candelabras and broken chair pieces to knock off the black shadow, they discovered the female butler's head had already been corroded by more than half. The remaining small half was half white and bubbling, while the other half was gurgling blood. Such a person naturally couldn't survive. The butler fell down like a normal corpse. The just fallen corpse rotted and decomposed at an incredible speed, then rapidly turned into a pool of rotten flesh before everyone's eyes. Everyone's hearts immediately turned cold. These black shadows' attacks were too terrifying. The several people who had originally wanted to battle the shadows immediately gave up and retreated from the room, working together to close the door and drag over a nearby cabinet to block it. The other female butler escaped with them, but her face showed no fear. She even turned back to urge them. "Find the madam, otherwise the demons will dissolve all of us." "Damn it!" Redbeard's expression was ugly. "These black shadows are a countdown. If we can't bring back the manor's madam, this place will probably be full of shadow monsters." But Lucy became even more certain of her earlier guess. "Or rather, we either find a way to retrieve the stolen madam, or find a way to enter the other space where the thief is." Just as her words fell, the blocked room door shattered with a crash. Several black shadows shot out from the doorway. Because they were so fast, they splattered against the opposite corridor wall with crackling sounds. But before people could find it funny, they pulled themselves up from the wall one by one, staring straight at the wizards in the corridor with their featureless black faces. There were too many of these shadows. Just moments ago, there were only 1 or 2 humanoid shadows, but now there seemed to be nearly 100. The terrifying pressure immediately made everyone's breathing stop. Suddenly, Redbeard grabbed the female butler standing beside him and hurled her hard at the shadows about to attack again. The moment the butler hit the wall, she was immediately enveloped by countless black shadows. Then her shadow-wrapped body began rapidly shrinking and deforming. Several drops of murky fluid flowed to the ground through shadow gaps, emitting a nauseating smell. The instant he threw the butler, Redbeard turned and ran. "Run!" Lucy's expression was ugly as she also ran. She had originally had several more questions to ask the butler, but hadn't expected Redbeard to directly sacrifice her to escape. But now wasn't the time to blame him. They needed to survive this crisis first. Chapter 623, Escape and Madness. This manor might have 2 spaces. In a narrow storage room, Lucy held up 2 fingers to the only remaining wizard beside her. Brando's expression was grave as he nodded. "Yes, I also think so. Otherwise, we couldn't have searched the entire manor without finding any trace of Saul and that madam." Brando told Lucy about the scene he saw when entering the manor, and how only Saul was absent. With an unknown number of shadow monsters outside, only by sharing intelligence could they cooperate and resolve the crisis quickly. If that's the case, that little girl is the fundamental reason we lost our power and entered the manor. Maybe finding that little girl will help us recover our magic. Brando pressed against the storage room door listening for sounds. He hadn't done such actions for a long time and had almost forgotten how to turn his neck to get his head to the side. Or we need to think of other methods. We all lost consciousness before entering here and still can't connect to our bodies. Maybe we're in some consciousness world. Brando thought of Saul's consciousness space, that place where he stayed only a few seconds before fearfully fleeing immediately. If completely immersed, waking up is very difficult. Brando scratched his hair. His mental power was already quite outstanding among second-rank wizards, but he still couldn't find flaws in this world. With the Borderland rules enhancement here, we can't break through the restrictions with our power alone. Lucy also acknowledged this place was quite dangerous, but her expression remained relatively calm. Now outside are those highly corrosive shadows. Do you have other methods? Brando was even considering knocking himself unconscious. At this time, Lucy suddenly knelt, clasped her hands into fists, and gently pressed them under her chin. Thunder's fury shake the four seas, law's sword cut down evil. I, Lucy Golden Thunder, request your favor, Thunder Lord Alex blessing. Please grant your great power to dispel the confusion before my eyes with lightning. Brando watched dumbfounded from the side. Aren't you a wizard? How could a wizard make such prayer gestures? Lucy slowly raised her eyes and lowered her arms. Brando noticed Lucy's eyes suddenly emitted tiny golden lightning. You recovered magic power. If this could restore magic power, Brando wouldn't mind praying to that Stargate Council Chairman Alec either. Seeing Brando's expression, Lucy immediately knew what he was thinking. Since birth, she had seen too many such envious gazes. Of course, the desire in Brando's eyes was more naked. When power reaches a certain level, it becomes godlike in fools' eyes. But my prayers differ from believers' prayers. Lucy slowly stood up. This power can't be used casually either. Excessive use will make me lose myself and completely become my great-great-grandfather's puppet. Puppet? Brando was shocked. Then he noticed another term, his jaw nearly dropping. Great-great-grandfather. Lucy was equally accustomed to others' shocked expressions when first learning her identity. Expressionlessly, she spread her hands. Crackle! Dazzling electric light instantly filled the entire storage room. Everything was completely covered by white light. After several seconds, Brando rubbed his eyes and barely recovered his vision. However, Miss Lucy's figure was no longer in this small storage room. He opened his mouth, momentarily unsure what to say. Wait, how did she just leave by herself? Such powerful sound effects couldn't take one more person. Bang, 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 bang. The electric flash commotion was too loud, alarming the devils wandering outside the door. The wooden room door immediately rang with banging sounds. Seeing white, pungent smoke gradually seeping through door cracks, as if something outside was corroding the walls and door panels. Brando was too exhausted to complain. He looked around and finally pulled out an iron rake for sweeping fallen leaves from a nearby barrel. Sure enough, none of them are reliable. Lucy opened her eyes and found herself back outside the dim manor. The magnificent front hall, which had faintly echoed with music, was now so quiet you could hear dust falling. She looked around but was surprised to discover only Redbeard, Brando, and that short wizard Dulat remained outside the manor. Blue Hair, the mummy wizard, and that detestable Kismet had all apparently awakened and left. When did they return? She wasn't the first to return, which annoyed Lucy somewhat. But she only bit her lip, not letting frustration continue controlling her. She raised her hand and released several electric arcs. Magic power and mental strength have returned. Lucy looked at Brando beside her and struck him in the chest with lightning. However, Brando showed no reaction, still standing motionless on the corridor. Crash! A scattering sound came from behind. Lucy immediately turned back and was shocked to see the short wizard crumbling into hundreds of thousands of fragments falling to the ground. Crash! Another sound. Turning back again, Lucy saw one of Brando's arms had also turned to fragments and fallen to the ground. A person, even a second-rank wizard, couldn't possibly survive becoming such fragments. It seems that, although I just left the powerless old day's manor, the commotion I caused put Brando in danger. I must wake him. Lucy still had her principles. Brando had just saved her, so naturally she wouldn't let him die in the illusion. But his body showed no reaction to lightning whatsoever. Lucy hesitated for half a second, then suddenly pressed her hand on Brando's head. If you still can't wake up like this, then I have no other methods. With a bang, Brando's entire body fell backward, his forehead bearing a small charred area. However, his body, leaning back halfway, suddenly stopped. Then his waist exerted force to support him, and he stood up again. Thank you, Miss Lucy. You're truly kind-hearted and beautiful. Brando looked down and saw his shattered arm, but he didn't mind. He moved his remaining right hand, and tremendous power immediately accumulated in his muscles and bones according to his will. Very good. Now we can properly play with the manor's master. Brando grinned savagely, as if he were the demon about to invade the manor. Lucy, who was observing Brando's condition, suddenly felt a twisted force coming from inside the manor. That force seemed to tease the magic power in her body, making her blood boil. Violent and chaotic emotions quietly grew, and an extremely strong destructive desire made her chest constantly heave. Opposite Lucy, Brando hadn't yet noticed his smile was gradually becoming ferocious. Let's go. Brando's eyes showed red bloodshot veins. Let's kill all the enemies inside. Lucy didn't immediately respond to Brando. Golden electric arcs flickered again in her eyes. Slight pain brought her sanity back slightly. Calm down, Brando. Your mind has been influenced by pollution. You can't actively fall into the abyss. Brando's charging figure immediately stopped. He panted heavily, looking at Lucy, who was also struggling to maintain reason. I think this place isn't exactly benevolent either. Boom! A second-floor window suddenly shattered, and a figure flew out from inside, heavily falling on the open ground in front of the manor. Lucy and Brando simultaneously turned to look, and immediately saw a person whose face had been smashed so badly it was caved into his skull, lying on the ground, dead beyond dead. Only his blue hair, stained with red and white matter, barely indicated the corpse's identity to them. Looking back, Kismet's figure appeared at the broken window. His silver hair and pale face were splattered with blood drops, but he didn't care about the filth on his face. He was smiling, leaning against the broken glass shards. Chapter 624. The Mutated Original Owner. Kismet. Seeing the blue-haired wizard's miserable death, a surge of rage immediately welled up in Lucy's heart. She seemed to see again how her friend had died in war. However, Lucy's status and responsibilities made her restrain her emotions. She called out to Kismet on the second floor. Did you kill Blue Hair? Kismet seemed to just notice Lucy, his mocking expression deepening. He sought death himself. He looked up toward the distance, suddenly closed his eyes and took a deep breath, as if using his nostrils to sense the air's humidity. It's getting dark, time to sleep. Suddenly, he opened his eyes again, looking at Lucy and Brando. Would you like me to play you a lullaby, or perhaps a sleep song? He suddenly raised his hand to grasp his collarbone and yanked outward, pulling out a delicate silver-white harp from his body. Lucy felt a rage almost bursting through her skull. Her remaining rationality told her that everyone here had been polluted by the strange forces in the manor, and now everyone was developing toward violent murder. But if this continued, they would soon kill each other until only one survived, twisted by slaughter. Can't attack. Lucy held onto the last thread in her heart, grabbing Brando, who was already preparing to charge to the second floor. Golden electric arcs jumped on both their bodies. using pain to drive away their murderous impulses. Though Lucy didn't launch an attack, Kismet standing by the second-floor window wasn't as courteous. His fingertips brushed the harp, clear sounds rang out, accompanied by terrifying howling. A protective layer immediately appeared before Lucy, but was directly shattered by invisible force the next second. She had to jump sideways abruptly to avoid the subsequent continuous attacks. His resonance is already strong enough to almost instantly shatter my protection. Ordinary magic probably can't maintain stability before Kismet. Open spaces are disadvantageous for me. The next second, Lucy and Brando charged back into Old Days Manor. Just as they entered the manor's main gate, the music outside stopped. But after entering the manor, that irritating feeling became even more obvious, as if hundreds of ants were crawling through their bone crevices toward every corner of their bodies. What exactly is this pollution? Brando looked at Lucy in pain. This kind of powerful influence must be the storm eye. The electric current on Lucy's body could hardly help her maintain rationality. We must quickly find the storm eye's location and seal it. Though I don't know what this storm eye you keep mentioning is. Brando raised his head. This annoying feeling seems to be coming from above. Lucy recalled the entire manor's structure she had seen from outside. This manor's highest point should be that tower. There. Saul was walking down the spiral staircase, heading for the true tower top. Halfway down, he faintly heard several clear string sounds and something shattering. This music sounds familiar. Could it be Kismet? Kismet's lyre was rarely used to play embarrassing melodies, but mostly participated in combat. Since Saul entered the manor, he hadn't seen anyone else, and later discovered he couldn't leave this manor either. The entire manor was blocked by an invisible membrane. Once through the main gate, it was impossible to jump out through windows. Most importantly, when Saul tried to move away from Old Days Manor, the diary would come out to stop him. Others' bodies were frozen outside the manor, but after I entered the manor, I discovered I had entered an inverted space. I can only faintly hear footsteps but can't see people. Following the stairs downward, Saul would listen carefully at each floor, listening for whether footsteps passed by him. But the earlier chaos seemed to dissipate with time's passage, and the entire manor became terrifyingly silent again. Whether it was invisible footsteps or roughly molded clay puppets, they all disappeared unknowingly. Staying alert, Saul walked down to the last floor's room. From the descending depth, this room should already be underground, yet there were still windows around the room. Only outside the windows was pitch black. Saul pinched his fingers, lighting a weak fluorescent glow. This room was also completely empty, with only a pool of dark stains in the center of the floor. Saul slowly walked over and smelled rich, bloody scent from what looked like dried stains. When he carefully probed with mental power, he discovered twisted chaos contained within the stains. Suddenly Saul's body violently trembled as a more domineering radiation came from overhead. The influence this radiation brought made Saul instantly extremely irritable. As if hundreds of little people were stuffed into his chest cavity, scratching and beating inside, making him constantly want to give his chest a knife for relief. However, Saul endured this irritability, while the rustling pages in his mind gradually suppressed the radiation's influence. What happened? Saul looked up in shock, an ominous premonition rising in his heart. At this moment, little Algie beside him suddenly shuddered violently, and the little girl it had bound tightly suddenly melted into pulp-like flesh. Flesh-colored liquid mixed with dark red juice flowed down through the black tentacles' gaps, pooling on the ground. Little Algie was somewhat confused. It seemed not to understand how the person it was restraining had turned to pulp when it hadn't used force. Seeing the pulp already crawling toward the dark stains on the ground, Saul's first thought was to release a barrier to block the pulp. However, the magical barrier was like fragile tissue paper, easily corroded and broken through. Saul stepped forward again, but his spellcasting movements were affected by the terrifying radiation striking from overhead again. His movements slowed by a step, and the little girl's pulp wriggled to the black stains in the center of the floor, instantly disappearing into them. The chaotic aura from overhead didn't seem to affect the pulp's movements. But strangely, little Algae also didn't seem much affected. It even wanted to bite off a piece of the pulp with bared fangs and claws. But Saul grabbed its end and pulled it back. Little Algae, go back. Saul was now resisting the chaotic aura from above while watching the pulp's movements, unable to supervise little Algae. He could only send it back first. What exactly is happening above? Could it be the storm eye? Saul frowned. But this stain here is also quite abnormal. Where exactly was the storm eye located? The sudden turn of events made Saul hurry. He stopped observing, stood with hands at his sides, his right fingertip suddenly becoming semi-transparent gray, softening and deforming like honey, flowing to the ground and gradually spreading near the black stains. The diary gave no warning. The gray tentacle gradually took shape on the ground, with circles of sharp, keen teeth protruding from the sucker at the tentacle's base. Clang! The tentacle suddenly swung down, sticking to the black stains, then yanked upward forcefully. A sound like tape tearing rang out as the gray tentacle actually pulled a twisted face from the flat ground. Saul crouched down, looking at that deformed, rotting face. It should be a middle-aged woman's face, but judging by the facial proportions, it was similar to the little girl who had turned to pulp. If I'm not mistaken, you should be Old Days Manor's original owner, that wizard who mutated due to pollution, right? Chapter 625, Layers of Illusion. The face pulled from the ground by Saul showed a twisted smile, its features already distorted from stretching, yet it didn't care at all. Welcome to my manor, little toy. You're the most interesting one I've encountered in so many years. Oh, I'm a toy. Then what are the others outside? Uninteresting toys. This middle-aged woman's sanity had probably dissipated, along with her original mutation. If this manor's mutation was caused by the storm eye, then it's very likely on this original owner. But now there's obviously something abnormal above the manor too, even continuously affecting my emotions. Both the phenomenon before him and the chaotic fluctuations overhead could be caused by the storm eye. Saul decided to first probe the woman before him, then consider the chaotic causes above. His tentacle absorbing, the woman began slowly applying force, boring from the woman's face into her deeper bodily tissues. Anyone uninformed would think Saul was a terrifying murderer. The woman showed no resistance either. From her expression, she seemed to enjoy this penetrating sensation. Soon, Saul discovered black tide pollution within the woman's body. But within this pollution were many other chaotic elements. Negative emotions, chaos, unclear consciousness. The pollution components on this woman are so complex. Matter mixed with gray, dark green, and black was absorbed into Saul's tentacle while corroding each other within the semi-transparent tentacle. She didn't mutate due to black tide pollution. It's more like she was polluted first, then corroded by black tide pollution afterward. But the degree of pollution and chaos on the woman didn't seem to match the word storm eye that foretold destruction. As pollution was gradually extracted by Saul, the woman's originally crazed eyes gradually calmed. She no longer looked at Saul with the superior attitude of appreciating her toy. Her eyes also held the confused feeling of awakening from a great dream. Why can you help me recover some sanity? The woman's half-rotted face gradually rose from the black stains, barely emerging with half her body, weakly prostrating on the ground. The pollution on you can still be individually extracted, indicating your mutation isn't completely irreversible. If you listen to me properly, maybe I'll consider helping you recover your sanity." The woman opened her mouth, touching her own cheeks with both hands, as if finding her own existence. Suddenly she laughed softly. "So I haven't completely mutated yet, but this fact was told to me by a stranger wizard." Saul frowned and crouched down. "What exactly caused your mutation? Is it related to the Borderlands Storm Eye? Do you know what a Storm Eye is?" However, the woman had never heard the term Storm Eye. From her vacant eyes, confusion was barely visible. "I don't know what you're talking about. Back then my research failed, magic power backfired, and I suffered terrible pollution. But when my exterior became a monster, not one of my friends and servants came to save me. They all wanted to leave this manor before I completely lost control." I could still speak and see then, but they ignored that I still retained sanity and actually sealed the entire room. The woman's eyes held undisguised hatred. If those people appeared before her again, the woman might tear them apart. My body had already melted beyond control, but my soul hadn't completely mutated. I pleaded over and over in the room, hoping they would come back to save me. Clearly, maybe just a potion, one magic power purification, might have saved me, but they chose to directly seal me, assuming my madness and mutation, unwilling even to spare an eye to properly check my condition. You don't know what it feels like to be unable to move or speak, while your vision is filled with disgusting hallucinations, gradually waiting to die in unbearable pain. I don't know how long passed. Just when I couldn't hold on anymore, other people actually entered my manor and sent someone to lift the seal. I thought I finally had a chance for rescue. The woman smiled miserably, but it immediately turned into neurotic, strange laughter. I was too naive. A person identified as polluted, one who had become a pool of flesh, even dried flesh. How could they believe I was a normal person? The woman looked at Saul, her desperate, painful emotions gradually weakening. They completely ignored my words, left this place, even reinforced the seal. My painful, powerless screams actually became their bragging capital. The woman's body was still rising. She could already straighten up. Until one day I suddenly woke up. The woman began laughing. My power had grown. Everything in the manor was obeying my commands, as if returning to my strongest time. No, I'm even stronger than before now. She looked at Saul, her eyes bloodshot, pupils so dilated they almost filled the entire whites. "You are just my newest toy." The woman's figure moved, seeming about to approach Saul. Saul suddenly raised one hand. "What do you think of me as a toy?" The woman was stumped by Saul's question. Her limited intelligence couldn't understand why Saul asked this, but she instinctively answered, "You're an interesting toy." Saul withdrew his hand, even retracting the arm that had become an octopus tentacle on the ground back into his sleeve, returning to a human arm. "I understand." Saul looked at the woman and actually reached out to touch her pitch-black face. "Actually, the space I'm in now isn't real space either. This is also your toy room, and all of us are just toys controlled by your strings." The woman's expression changed, seeming to want to say something. However, the basement they were in suddenly shook violently. But this impact didn't come from the overhead rooms. It came from outside. Saul clearly felt an extremely powerful existence entering this space. The entire world seemed to tremble. If this was a dream, then this dream was about to shatter due to the intervention of extremely unstable forces. Third-rank wizards had entered. Saul's expression became serious. He knew Payer's side must have made their move. But he still hadn't confirmed the Storm Eye's specific existence here. Could this place really not be the Storm Eye, but rather the source above his head emanating chaos and malice be the Storm Eye? If Saul and the others entering this manner was like small stones thrown into a lake's surface, causing ripples, then the powerful existence of third rank was like a brick ruthlessly smashed into a mirror, directly shattering the mirror. Soon the entire space trembled again. The scene before Saul suddenly became distorted and shaky like a bad signal. For several seconds, Saul seemed to see that where he was wasn't an empty room with sealed windows, but a room full of miscellaneous items. Underfoot were metal shelves fallen crosswise. Before him were tables and chairs twisted and deformed from impact. Walls and floor bore numerous blood spray marks, as if a terrible battle had occurred here. Behind the twisted furniture lay a corpse with only half an upper body remaining. That half body was also bloody and mangled, as if gnawed by something. The corpse lying on the ground actually had the same face as the woman just now. The scene fluctuated again, returning to the empty room with sealed windows. Saul closed his eyes. In the last moment of that flashback scene, he had seen a huge rat in that chaotic room, its mouth corners stained with abundant fresh blood. Chapter 626, Rat Killing. The giant rat only flashed past briefly. Saul still stared at the reappearing black woman. It seems you're not the true master of this world either. Third-rank wizards had already entered Old Days Manor and might now be attracted by the commotion overhead, having gone to the manor's upper levels. Then you're useless. After Saul finished speaking, he pretended to leave. Wait, you can't go, you're my toy. The woman reached out to grab Saul. Saul suddenly twisted away, dodging the woman's hand. He saw the woman's face had become ferocious, her entire body suddenly growing larger like a giant net covering Saul. Saul raised his hand to block. A protective shield sparkling with electric light had already enveloped his surroundings. The dazzling light from the electric protection immediately made the woman cover her eyes and retreat. Saul turned and pursued, condensing a black blade in his palm and immediately stabbing toward the shrinking woman. The woman's eyes hadn't recovered yet, so she instinctively dodged downward. However, Saul's black blade suddenly curved halfway at half a meter from the woman, shooting toward an empty corner. The black blade also suddenly disappeared midair, followed by a piercing scream. A squeak. Sure enough, it's a big rat. Saul immediately abandoned the local stains and attacked toward the room's corner according to the scene he had just witnessed. The will hear blurred directions and positions, even preventing Saul from sensing the room's internal layout, but it couldn't truly make life disappear. A handful of fresh blood gushed from the air, then the surrounding scene began changing like fading colors. Saul immediately felt the gravity on his body change. He fell halfway, then immediately flew, subsequently turning upside down to see the entire room was identical to the room he had just seen in the flashback. Except up and down were reversed. Where Saul had just attacked, a huge rat capable of swallowing 3 adults rapidly grew larger in his vision and opened its bloody maw toward him. Whoosh! A black tentacle suddenly shot out from behind Saul, stabbing straight down the rat's foul throat. However, just as little Algae was about to pierce through the rat, 5 or 6 arms suddenly extended from the rat's throat, grabbing little Algae and forcefully pulling it, seeming to want to tear it apart directly. The giant rat also violently closed its upper and lower jaws at this moment, wanting to use its sharp teeth to directly cut the black tentacle. Saul immediately intervened, grasping the giant rat's upper and lower jaws, forcibly stopping its mouth halfway in the air, unable to close further. But before Saul could pry open the giant rat's mouth, several more arms with skin corroded to expose black bones extended from its mouth. This rat has used spatial displacement to devour who knows how many wizards, and its mutation degree probably isn't less than the woman just now. Saul quickly looked up and discovered the stain on the ceiling was quiet and still, with no intention of helping the giant rat attack him together. Black blades condensed again around Saul, sliding toward the arms in the rat's mouth like broken glass. Pache! Pache! The blades severed 2 arms and continued forward, cutting all the arms restraining little Algie. Little Algie, regaining freedom, didn't retreat but took advantage of its mobility. Its round head instantly stretched and sharpened, silently piercing into the giant rat's back brain. Squeak! The giant rat immediately let out sharp screams, the entire rat struggling in pain. With its screaming, Saul actually discovered the room's gravity seemed to be changing again. Sky and ground seemed to swap directions. If they entered false space again, the giant rat would probably take the opportunity to leave, just waiting for them to die from the pollution here before coming to gnaw their corpses. This rat could actually survive by eating mutated corpses, and had probably become part of Old Days Manor. Should I use the mental battlefield? Using the consciousness battlefield could quickly resolve the giant rat, but Saul had hidden things in his consciousness, and feared that any use would let some existence with very strong consciousness discover his abnormality. No! Saul gritted his teeth and controlled his impulse to use his trump card. Then, before the entire room scene was swallowed by alternate space again, he suddenly projected the soul of his upper body out of his flesh, with only his lower body still connected. At this moment, the air rippled again, and the originally transforming space stopped once more. Oh right, there are 3 third ranks outside in total. The soul-projected Saul showed a delighted smile. The giant rat seemed to sense Saul's change, its sharp cries carrying several notes of fear. Several overlapping black shadows also appeared on the rat's body surface. Those shadows looked like suffering humans, struggling outward with effort. Saul looked at those shadows expressionlessly. His soul bodies half gradually grew over 10 tentacles with suckers and sharp teeth, completely enveloping the giant rat. After a moment, Saul's soul returned. His body fell again, stepping on an overturned table. The spatial changes finally stopped. Moreover, these changes seemed to extend outward from this room. Snap! Little Algie returned, and the giant rat's corpse fell to the ground, having become an irregular rat hide. Little Algie approached Saul and opened its shark-toothed mouth. A monocle fell out. Isn't this that blue-haired wizard's monocle? He was actually eaten by the rat. Saul didn't know what had happened to the blue-haired wizard, but hadn't expected that when he saw him again, only one relic would remain. Little Algie opened the giant rat's belly, while Saul found a pollution source in its corrupted soul. Based on his experience treating others during this time, he basically confirmed this pollution source was exactly what the giant rat relied on to devour other wizards' corpses. But this pollution source wasn't the Storm Eye. Its ability to contain various pollutions was completely different from the Storm Eye characteristics Pear had described. This rat isn't the Storm Eye either. So is the Storm Eye still the place where chaotic radiation fluctuations came from earlier? Saul felt somewhat strange. The Storm Eye wasn't actually on Old Days Manor's dominant figure. Could Old Days Manor's mutation actually be unrelated to the Storm Eye? With the giant rat's death, space restored and confusion ended. The floor full of corpses gnawed with holes suddenly began accelerating decay, making their original identities unidentifiable. Simultaneously, as if breaking some confinement and barrier, explosive sounds of magical collisions suddenly came through the spiral staircase. Actually not far from Saul's location. Before space restoration, he had sensed no other people around at all. Just as Saul was about to rush out of the room, he looked up and saw the black stain overhead. It was like black mold growing from years of dampness and water seepage. Quiet and still, not attracting any attention. Saul flew up and came beside the stain. "Are you still here?" Though many incomplete corpses lay below, only this stain faintly transmitted mental fluctuations. Saul suddenly realized that, while the giant rat he had killed might have controlled this manor's spatial changes, the manor owner's story might not be false. Chapter 627, The Powerful Kismet. "Are you still here?" Saul's voice caused the stain that seemed to have dried up long ago to suddenly show some reaction. The sounds of fighting outside were becoming increasingly clear, as if they would soon enter this room. The black stain finally reacted, and a human face slowly emerged, exactly the same as the Saul had seen before emerging from the black stain. The same mutilation and decay. Seeing this face, Saul understood that she had lost the chance to recover. That little bit of rational ability to communicate might only come from the memory inertia from before her mutation. The woman looked at Saul. "My toy. Actually, you can't control this manor at all. The true master of old days manor is actually a giant carrion-eating rat." The mask-like face tilted at an angle, trying hard to look at Saul. "It was my only playmate during that time. It said that if it ate me, it could take me everywhere." The black face cracked into an arc. "As long as it can give me freedom again, what does it matter whether the master here is human, monster, or rat?" The woman's face rapidly dehydrated, and along with the stain on the wall, numerous fine cracks appeared. Some black debris fell rustling down, revealing the dark yellow wall behind. After the giant rat died, the woman who depended on it would also disappear. "But I don't hate you, my lovely toy. This kind of life forever trapped in illusion isn't what I wanted either. Now, the pollution source that bound me has collapsed, and I'm about to gain freedom." The black face smiled silently. Because of the mutation pollution, the woman couldn't move, but also couldn't die. Just thinking about this kind of pain made one feel as uncomfortable as having ants crawling all over their body. Even if gaining freedom means welcoming death afterward, Saul silently completed the words the woman couldn't say. Boom! The room door was suddenly blasted open. A golden electric net exploded violently. Even though he was still some distance from the door, Saul felt all the hair on his body stand up. And just as he turned to look at the door, the woman's face suddenly struggled to emerge from the stain, pressed against Saul's ear, and said something. Afterward, as if all energy was consumed, the woman's face, along with the stain on the wall, completely dried up in an instant, crackling as it fell from the ceiling and shattered with a snap. No longer could one tell that there had once been a person there, a desperate soul. The woman's consciousness completely disappeared with the collapse of the pollution. Thud, 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 thump. In the next second, another woman staggered backward into this underground room, stepping on the black ashes on the ground. She was covered in wounds, her clothes already tattered, golden electric arcs flashing continuously from head to toe, looking extremely disheveled. Miss Lucy. Saul hadn't expected that when he saw Miss Lucy again, she would be in such a state. Upon hearing Saul's voice, Lucy's first reaction was to directly attack Saul. Several lightning bolts twisted into the shape of pythons, heading straight for Saul with great momentum, the scorching current containing murderous intent. Saul, still maintaining his levitation spell, retreated rapidly. However, the electric python that missed its first strike actually turned its head and attacked Saul again. Saul retreated while his lips moved constantly. Then he had nowhere left to retreat, his entire body pressed against the corner. In the next second, the electric arc python suddenly opened its huge mouth towards Saul in the corner. At the same moment, a barrier composed of golden electric arcs suddenly appeared in front of Saul, withstanding the python's first attack before directly conducting its current into the nearby wall. The nearby wall surface immediately turned black and emitted a burnt smell. Seeing Saul's series of responses, Lucy, who had originally wanted to make a move, was stunned and quickly withdrew her attack. "Are you Saul?" Saul's hair was slightly frizzed as he observed Lucy through the gaps in the electric light shield. "It's me, Miss Lucy. How is it that you don't recognize me?" Lucy breathed a sigh of relief and stared at the door again. Just now, the ceiling suddenly transmitted powerful and chaotic radiation, and our consciousness was all affected. We even couldn't help but want to attack each other. Does Lucy want to explain that she attacked me subconsciously under influence? Saul thought secretly. No, when she saw me, her expression was clear, her eyes changing from original wariness to terror. It doesn't seem like a reaction influenced by violence. What Lucy said might not be the truth, making Saul increasingly vigilant. Lucy didn't notice Saul's wariness. She kept watching the door vigilantly, as if some enemy might emerge from there at any moment. She swept the surroundings with her peripheral vision and was surprised to find that there were many highly decomposed corpses here. "You've been here all along. We clearly searched this area." Lucy seemed to be asking Saul, but she didn't pay attention to his reaction, still staring at the door. Just as Saul was about to speak, suddenly, a slender arm pressed against the outward opening door. Then Kismet, with disheveled hair, poked his head out from behind. "Ah, got you." Kismet's gaze then turned to Saul beside Lucy, his smile becoming even more joyful. Caught another one. Looking at Kismet's appearance, Saul figured he was probably having another episode. Lucy looked at Kismet very nervously, as if she had just suffered at his hands. "What are you doing? Why did you suddenly start fighting?" Saul also retreated. Without understanding the reason, he didn't want to get involved casually. "He's gone mad. When the chaotic radiation came from above, he suddenly started attacking us. He destroyed Red Beard's body, severely injured Brando, and has been chasing me until now." Kismet laughed in acknowledgement, then suddenly made his move. Though he didn't seem to take out his harp, the sound of strings filled the air. "Be careful." In the emergency, Lucy only had time to warn Saul before her whole body erupted with golden lightning again, like a huge flower bud wrapping around her body. However, the massive electric light trembled violently in the string sounds, then shattered piece by piece. Finally, Lucy was blasted against the wall behind her and fell down. Saul watched everything that happened in the blink of an eye with surprise. He knew Kismet was strong, but he hadn't expected that when facing Lucy, who was also a second-rank elite, he could almost completely overwhelm her. Kismet's sonic resonance attack seemed more powerful than what Saul had seen before, able to easily break through the magic barriers Lucy created. Moreover, Lucy had been running and defending all along, obviously knowing that her attacks could no longer harm Kismet. At this time, Kismet glanced at Saul sideways, his voice sinister. "Don't worry, after I kill her, you're next." Saul's face was solemn, but actually completely confused. Kismet grabbed at the air with both hands as if grasping taut strings, then swung his arms. A piercing piano sound, twang, drilled into Saul's ear canal, hitting his eardrum hard. The magic defense Saul had just raised was almost useless before being cut by the string sound. He immediately felt warmth in his ear canal, and the surroundings suddenly became quiet. But Lucy across from him was worse off. She struggled to surge with electric light again, only to be slammed against the wall once more. 3 huge wounds burst open on her chest, as if a giant beast's claws had viciously swept across. The scene before him had completely entered silent mode. Saul's heart stirred, and he suddenly had his soul leave his body, attacking Kismet from behind. His head instantly turned into a dense ball of yarn, expanding to fill the entire room when it scattered. Then it grabbed at Kismet from all directions. Kismet, who was about to attack Lucy again, immediately turned around, his fingers plucking the air, instantly severing several threads. But there were too many threads composed of souls, and even after being cut, they still entangled together. Kismet raised his eyebrows and only then stepped back. A large number of soul threads fell to the ground without causing any destruction, but instead condensed together, becoming a new Saul. This way, Saul managed to position himself between Lucy and Kismet. A flash of amusement passed through Kismet's eyes, instantly turning into twisted madness. However, just as he raised both hands, about to unleash his terrifying sonic magic again, milky white wind chimes suddenly emerged from the room's ceiling, floating above the three people's heads, yet making no sound at all. Chapter 628, Third Rank enters the scene. Saul didn't hear the wind chimes, but his soul threads scattered around were the first to sense those seemingly real, yet illusory wind chimes. The milky white shell-shaped wind chimes moved without wind, chaotic and disorderly, making one feel a weightless sensation of falling into an abyss with just one glance. They were Dreammaker Clark's wind chimes. "Clark," Lucy raised her head and shouted at the wind chimes, "Kill Kismet." Kismet's movements paused, and without hesitation, he turned to flee toward the rear door. However, the entire room suddenly stretched out, and no matter how Kismet ran, he couldn't approach the door. Kismet seemed to realize he couldn't escape Clark this way, immediately came to an abrupt stop, and stomped his foot hard. The bricks and stones on the ground instantly exploded one by one, the tremendous sound seemingly carrying new magical power, actually making the wind chimes overhead begin to sway stiffly. From the corner of his eye, Saul also noticed that Lucy, who had originally wanted to secretly attack Kismet, suddenly clutched her head and collapsed to the ground. She looked extremely pained. However, Saul, aside from being unable to hear anything, didn't feel any other attacks. Saul immediately deployed a soul armor spell to filter out part of the magical power, making Lucy behind him feel somewhat better. When Saul shifted his attention back to the front, he found that Kismet had somehow disappeared. The wind chimes overhead had also returned to their disorderly swaying. Only then did Saul restore his hearing through minor healing, then lowered his head to check on Lucy's condition. It was a terrible sight. He took out a cloak from his storage device and draped it over Lucy's body, which had barely any fabric left. Lucy had huge wounds cut by sonic waves all over her body. Although she wasn't bleeding thanks to magic, the exposed flesh looked quite horrifying. Saul took out a potion and handed it to Lucy. She sat down against the wall, tightly gripping the cloak in front of her, but refused Saul's potion. "Thank you, but I can't take medicine right now." Lucy's snow-white shoulder on one side was still exposed, with a huge wound slowly healing. In just a few seconds, it completely closed, and even the cut was rapidly fatting. It didn't seem like magic or self-healing ability, but rather like using some kind of tool. Saul simply took back the potion and drank it himself. He also had some minor wounds on his body, all caused by the aftermath of Kismet's attacks. Just as Saul was getting up, he suddenly felt a hand gripping his throat, lifting his entire body. Saul felt like his neck was about to be snapped. He immediately tried to counterattack, but couldn't grasp any attacking target. His hands pressed on his neck, but didn't touch the arm that was strangling him. Everything seemed like air, like his imagination. Like a dream without logic. Saul tried to separate his soul from his body, but found that the arm restraining his throat was also gripping his soul body, making it impossible for him to leave his body. Just as Saul widened his eyes and prepared to transform his hands into tentacles, Lucy beside him suddenly spoke. Clark let go of Saul. All the wounds on Lucy's body had completely healed, and she struggled to get up from the ground. Although she looked disheveled and was wearing Saul's cloak, she had now straightened her chest and raised her chin, regaining her reserved yet proud demeanor. However, Clark only slightly loosened his grip without completely releasing Saul. Saul grasped Clark's wrist, trying to break free with magical power, but found that whenever he wanted to cast magic, a strange drowsiness would prevent him from mobilizing his mental power. Lucy frowned. Lord Clark, Saul just saved my life from Kismet's hands. Whatever conflicts you had with him before, please put him down first and at least give him a chance to explain. Just then, a strong wind swept in, blowing the already messy furnishings in the room to the walls. When the wind stopped, Payer was already standing in the center of the room. Seeing Saul being restrained, she was about to step forward but then stopped. Clark let go of Saul. Facing Payer, Clark showed an ambiguous smile, feeling sorry for your little lover. Saul's mouth twitched. Payer's face stiffened, then she rolled her eyes as if impatiently. This kid has some ability. I'm keeping him because he's useful. You mean his ability to cleanse pollution, Clark said with a smile. That's quite good, but I prefer to have this kind of special ability in my own hands. Clark suddenly pulled Saul closer. For instance, I could directly devour his soul, and then I'd know what his ability is like. Hearing devour his soul, Payer's eyes twitched, feeling he was making pointed remarks. She lowered her head, deliberately adopting a submissive posture. His ability is useful to me, and besides, you know his identity. Clark narrowed his eyes. Of course I know. A self-overestimating little wizard who conspires with you on how to kill me. Lucy was stunned, and the pleading words in her mouth went unspoken. Saul showed a panicked expression, mumbling some syllables as if trying to beg for mercy. But Payer's eyes flashed with fierce light, and she suddenly rushed forward, transforming into a whirlwind, no longer caring about Saul in Clark's hands, directly trapping both of them. After the whirlwind passed, Payer reappeared. She looked at Clark and Saul's corpses on the ground, momentarily at a loss. Lucy beside her retreated in terror, looking at Payer as if seeing an extremely terrifying monster. Payer lowered her head again, but her gaze fell on Saul lying on the ground with unfocused eyes. What happened? Did I kill them both? She unconsciously clenched her fists, feeling empty inside with no satisfaction of revenge. It's a dream. Ophelia's voice suddenly rang in her mind. Payer breathed a huge sigh of relief, but the next second she became tense again. I didn't react at all. Has Clark already approached the fourth rank? Heh, Ophelia laughed disdainfully. Even if he really devoured you, it would only increase his probability of entering the fourth rank. Payer tried to break free from the dream, but found that even though her strength had almost completely recovered, she still couldn't find any flaws in the dream. Ophelia, according to our agreement, you should act now. Payer didn't need Ophelia to personally kill Clark, nor could the other party transmit such powerful force through her body. She only needed Ophelia to help her escape the dream's entanglement. As long as she wouldn't be invaded by dreams and have her mental power disturbed, she was confident she could keep Clark in old days manner forever. However, Ophelia, who should have fulfilled the agreement, suddenly fell silent. Payer waited for a while. Every second felt like a year. Ophelia. Ophelia. Her face instantly became ferocious. Saul looked at Payer, who suddenly stood motionless and silent, immediately realizing that Clark had made his move against her. Payer had very likely already been pulled into a dream. Saul immediately became panicked, trying to divert Clark's attention. As long as Ophelia acted, Payer could quickly break free from the dream. If Clark relaxed his guard at this moment, it would be the best opportunity for a sneak attack. Chapter 629, Overestimating Yourself. However, after struggling for a long time, Saul didn't wait for Ophelia to act. Clark pulled Saul's face closer and said to him like a dream whisper, "Are you waiting for Ophelia to help her?" Saul was stunned. His feigned struggling immediately stopped, and he stared intently at Clark. "Do you think that just because fourth-rank wizard Ophelia can enter the borderland, others can't? There are other fourth-rank wizards who came in too. Aren't they afraid this place will collapse?" Saul twisted his neck, which suddenly became thin like a hair strand, drilling out from between Clark's fingers. Clark showed a surprised look and lowered his head to look at his own hand. "You didn't use mental power, yet you could directly transform and escape. Did you combine your soul with your flesh? You're really not afraid of death." After breaking free from Clark, Saul's body had already returned to normal. Blood-soul fusion was indeed a very dangerous magical transformation. Otherwise, Anne's Bloodrose family wouldn't have declined so quickly. But Saul's initial soul-devouring resin transformation itself had steps to combine soul with blood, which was very compatible with blood-soul fusion transformation. After Saul freed himself from Clark's restraints, he immediately shouted at the motionless pair, "Lady Ophelia, whatever the reason, you can't just let Payer be devoured by Clark's nightmare, can you?" Payer's body trembled slightly, as if Ophelia was preparing to act. However, Clark just moved his lips, silently mouthing a few words to Ophelia. Then he made a sound. "I know what you came here to do. I only want the wind sprite's soul. You can still use her body. You wouldn't want the balance to be broken, would you?" Payer's body actually became calm again. Not knowing what conditions Clark had offered Ophelia, she actually didn't even care about her own sister. As soon as the words fell, Saul felt extremely powerful mental power fluctuations coming from behind him. These mental power fluctuations were very familiar, clearly belonging to Clark in front of him. But now his mental power was coming from behind. Saul turned around sharply and immediately met eyes with Clark, who had narrowed his eyes. The other party had somehow come behind him without his notice. Indeed, relying on others doesn't work. In the end, you still have to rely on yourself. Saul no longer hesitated and immediately tried to forcibly drag Clark into his mental battlefield. However, the other party's mental power was as solid as a mountain, and Saul couldn't move him at all. Not only that, after releasing his mental power, Saul also felt intense drowsiness. His eyelids immediately became as heavy as if filled with mercury, almost unhesitatingly seeking his lower eyelids. In the state between sleep and wakefulness, Saul vaguely heard Clark's voice, cold as winter. "Never attack someone of higher rank than you, even though your mental power is strong enough to move even me. Let me see what exactly gave you such special talent." Lucy beside them wanted to speak but hesitated. She knew that although her great-grandfather was Thunder Lord Alec, the chairman of the Stargate Council, at this moment being only second rank, she still had no voice. Among wizards pursuing knowledge and power, only one's own strength could earn true respect. Saul had a dream. In the dream, he was aging in reverse. He saw the scene when he first entered the borderland. But this scene quickly disappeared. Time reversed, turning into flowing light. In the flowing light, Saul saw himself communicating with August Shea. But this image also quickly distorted and stretched into the distance. He saw himself fighting under the wizard tower, and Kelly running frantically toward him. These images also didn't stay long. He passed through Blue Water Bay, crossed Hanging Valley, left Ralph's Manor, returned to the wizard tower, back to the day he first took the apprentice test. Seed, sitting in front of him, laughed loudly. "Two opposing elements. You really just wrote whatever." Nick beside him didn't speak, just quietly watched Saul. Saul saw himself reach for the puppet doll in the middle. He remembered that at this time, he was determined to faint during the mental power test. Although he wasn't clear why fainting would let him escape the magic test and survive, the diary didn't say this wouldn't work, which meant it would work. The next second, Saul found himself entering his weak body from that time, staring intently at the puppet doll. And those familiar "save me" and the "kill me" mixed within. Soon, Saul felt dizzy and uncomfortable all over, as if someone had stuck their hand into his brain matter and kept stirring, causing all his nerves to be pulled and torn. He really wanted to look away, but told himself to persist. As long as he persisted, he could survive. Gradually, darkness began to invade his brain. Numbness quietly crept up from his spine. That's enough, Saul thought. I'm about to faint. But just then, an abrupt voice that seemed to come from his own body spoke up. Are you really going to faint? But your limit is far beyond this. The puppet's screaming had changed. The "save me" voices disappeared, all becoming dense "kill me, kill me." The strange voice inside continued, you want to faint only because you want to faint, but now you don't want to faint anymore. Pain and darkness both retreated, and Saul suddenly widened his eyes. Seed and Nick, who were waiting to watch the show, both stood up from their seats. Their gazes at Saul gradually changed from shock to fear. And the sound from the puppet doll also changed. Kill me, Gorsa, kill me. Gorsa, Saul unconsciously repeated, kill me. Kill me, Gorsa killed me again. Killed me again. Saul was stunned, suddenly curious about what again meant. Then he found himself actually leaving the wizard tower where he was being tested, arriving at a grassy field. Where is this now? Saul turned around in place. The sunlight was just right, tender green grass dotted with tiny white flowers. A gentle breeze came, and the flowers and grass lowered themselves as if greeting Saul. Brother Saul, Brother Saul. A silver butterfly appeared from somewhere, spinning and approaching Saul like a flower petal dancing in the wind. Everything was as beautiful as a dream. However, the sky suddenly became overcast with thunder rumbling, as if something terrible was about to happen. And Penny's joyful dance immediately lost its composure and happiness, with fear trembling in its voice. Brother Saul, someone wants to eat me, quickly help me hide. Saul immediately spoke, Penny, quickly hide in my dream. Penny obediently listened, and immediately flew into Saul's forehead. Then yellow sand swept between heaven and earth, and visibility dropped to less than 1 meter in an instant. Coarse sand particles hit Saul's skin like countless steel knives, constantly cutting him. That voice from the bottom of his heart spoke again. So you hid the nightmare butterfly in your own dream. Heh, truly exceptionally talented and incredibly confident. To play with your own dreams in front of a dreammaker. Overestimating yourself. Chapter 630, Desperate Counterattack. The scene before Saul's eyes changed again. The yellow sand, grassland, dark clouds, and sunlight all disappeared. Only darkness remained around him. Gradually, flickering points of light and hazy halos appeared in the darkness. But the main body was still pitch black. Silent and peaceful, yet seemingly containing extremely powerful force. He felt himself floating in midair, with no force acting on him from above, below, left, or right. But at the same time, he was slowly moving, drifting toward one of the dim halos. Saul felt as if he had been in this state, where he couldn't move or even think properly for hundreds or thousands of years. He now urgently wanted to move, to see something else, to hear sounds other than silence. So after this thought arose, Saul felt his speed change. He was rapidly approaching the dim halo he had been gradually moving toward. And the speed was getting faster and faster. Oh, I suddenly gained a force. This force gave him acceleration, making the points of light before his eyes quickly turn into thin lines, then into flowing light, and finally even the flowing light disappeared. A sharp, piercing sound suddenly rang out, violently startling Saul, who was still trying to approach the halo. He suddenly opened his eyes and saw Clark, who had been standing in front of him, now curled up on the ground with his hands covering his face. Red liquid gushed out from between his fingers. The volume was so large, it couldn't possibly be the blood capacity of one person. Saul held his forehead, but was actually secretly pulling Penny out from his dream. The little butterfly hiding in Saul's past dreams had already actively sealed off its 5 senses, but even so, it was trembling as it returned to the diary. It seemed it would need a long time to recover. Saul lowered his arms, still looking like he hadn't fully woken up. At the same time, Pear, who hadn't moved all this time, also suddenly woke up. Her face was pale, as if she still hadn't recovered from the endless dreams. But when she saw Clark collapsed on the ground, she stepped forward and grabbed Saul. "What happened? Was it Ophelia?" "It wasn't me." Ophelia, hiding within Pear's body, took the initiative to speak. "It was your little lover who did it." But Saul shook his head. "I don't know what terrible thing he saw in my dream either." He wasn't lying. The dream just now clearly wasn't scary at all. Lucy in the corner was already stunned. She looked at Clark still wailing in pain on the ground, then at Saul, who looked sleepy as if he had just woken up, feeling her worldview completely overturned. But Lucy was also a wizard who had seen storms. She tried hard to calm herself down and minimize her presence, while praying again in her heart to her great-grandfather, Lord Alec. Although praying twice in a short time would cause some mental pollution, the fact that a second rank had actually killed a third rank wizard with advancement possibilities was too terrifying. She had to inform her great-grandfather of this immediately. However, just as Lucy uttered the first word of her prayer, her head suddenly fell off, rolling with momentum all the way to Saul's feet. Pear, who had been questioning why Ophelia didn't act, and Saul, who was silently recovering his mental power, both looked over. Behind Lucy, a silver-haired man clicked his tongue. "The borderland is chaotic enough already. Let's not summon another fourth-rank wizard." After Kismet finished speaking, he looked up and smiled at Saul. But he only glanced at Saul once, then turned to the vigilant Pear with a flourish, bowing slightly. "Master, please forgive my presumption. It's better not to let other fourth-rank wizards know about this matter." Pear was stunned, but then understood that Kismet wasn't talking to her, but to Ophelia inside her body. Pear's right hand unconsciously lifted, and a small opening cracked in her palm. A drop of red blood flowed out, then rapidly expanded, forming a bloody human face. This face should have been beautiful, but now it only inspired fear. As if all the blood in one's body twisted along with it and crawled along the blood vessels. "It would surprise me if you actually behaved obediently." Ophelia's voice carried no emotion, then her face turned to look at Saul. "Your body harbors terrifying power. Perhaps I should kill you directly here." Kismet, who was bowing, instantly raised his eyelids. "Ophelia," Pear immediately shouted. Saul glanced at his diary and casually shrugged. "If you also want to become the next Dreammaker." He. Ophelia's indifferent laughter rang out. "You should be grateful that it was me who discovered all this, not other fourth-rank wizards. For me, this world is already riddled with holes and beyond saving. I don't care about one more like you." This world is riddled with holes. Saul immediately thought of the abyss across the continent, and the huge waves surging in all directions. Could it be that the Tribunal and Stargate Council can no longer stop the abyss's pollution of the world? Or is only Ophelia, as a fourth rank, holding a pessimistic attitude toward the future? Ophelia no longer looked at Saul but turned to Clark, who had stopped screaming on the ground. The blood that had flowed from his face had now pooled into a large puddle on the floor. Finally knows to actively delete his own memories. though it looks like he also paid the price of permanently losing his sight. Seeing that Ophelia was no longer focusing on Saul, Peyer secretly breathed a sigh of relief. She also didn't want Saul to draw the other party's attention again, so she quickly stepped forward and raised her left hand toward Clark lying motionless on the ground. Although the process completely exceeded her plans, the result was good. She wanted to take this opportunity to kill Clark completely. Who knew Ophelia would speak up to stop her again? "No, you can't kill him." Peyer sneered. "How is it that when he attacked me, you didn't care, but now when I want to kill him, you intervene? What exactly did he offer you to make you willingly bear the punishment for breaking the contract?" Fourth-rank wizards who signed contracts also had to bear equivalent consequences for breaking them. Like a spring, the greater the force you apply, the greater the rebound. But Ophelia said in a heavy voice, "I've already helped you several times. If you still die at his hands, then you're too incompetent. As for Clark, he indeed cannot die now." Kismet stepped forward to speak for his current master. "I suppose Clark must have told you some very important information just now." Ophelia's eyes showed amusement as she glanced at Kismet. "Heth, there's no harm in telling you. The second pillar of the Stargate Council, the fourth rank of the Glare family, is about to die." Whether it was the sorrow of seeing their own kind perish, Ophelia's voice also seemed somewhat heavy. The Stargate Council only has 2 fourth-rank wizards in total. If one dies, then the remaining Alec, no matter how strong, will inevitably fall at a disadvantage against the Tribunal with its 2 fourth-rank wizards, and the Tribunal will definitely take this opportunity to expand their influence. Sky City will find it even harder to maintain neutrality then. Ophelia's words shocked everyone. Saul looked at Clark on the ground and finally understood why the three-way balance of power in the borderland had suddenly changed. The Stargate Council wants to promote Clark, making him the new fourth rank to oppose the Tribunal after the Glare family's fourth rank dies. Kismet also caught on. He held his cheeks with both hands, pouting as he looked at the unconscious Clark on the ground, envious Tilda. Chapter 631, Friends. For Saul and Kismet, 2 second ranks, they could only say envious. But for Peyer, who was also third rank, it was deep jealousy. "He can no longer advance now. Why are you still protecting him? Whether he can advance or not cannot be determined by you or me. It must be Alec himself who gives up," Ophelia said with a smile. Seeing that Peyer was still unwilling and wanted to kill Clark here, Saul grabbed her hand. "This matter indeed requires people from the Stargate Council to confirm that Clark has no possibility of advancement. If Clark dies like this, the Stargate Council might conclude that Lord Ophelia acted to obstruct their promotion of a new fourth-rank wizard." Peyer glared at Saul. "Are you stupid? Would you rather leave a witness alive and let them know you were the one who made Clark like this?" Understanding that Peyer was concerned about him, Saul smiled. "Only the 4 of us know about this now. You and I won't tell. If Lord Ophelia speaks out, the Stargate Council will also know she once stood by and watched someone die, and they'll probably suspect her too. That's no different from killing Clark now." Saul turned to look at Kismet. Now there's only this one outsider left. Kismet's mouth twitched as he bowed slightly, saying meaningfully, "I am my master's most loyal servant and would absolutely never reveal my master's secrets." Peyer gritted her teeth, essentially accepting everyone's decision. Saul stepped forward to check on Clark's condition. When he removed his hands, he was shocked to find that his eyes were gone. It wasn't that his eyes had disappeared from their sockets, but rather the parts of his face where eyes should be were now completely empty. As if Clark had never had eyes as organs at all. He truly lost his vision this time. Even healing magic cannot restore it. Saul remembered the giant with covered eyes he had seen in his dream. Now it seemed that referred to Clark. That bird flying up to the stars. Saul turned back to look at Pear, just catching Ophelia also staring thoughtfully at Pear. The day I had the prophetic dream, several third ranks in the borderland had the same dream simultaneously, but their dreams seemed to lack my presence. The fake wind sprite who had also had prophetic dreams was still in Saul's diary, and because of her powerful strength, she hadn't disappeared yet. By the way, where is Firefly Lord Herbert? Saul suddenly remembered there should be another third rank here. Pear hated Dreammakers and had no good feelings toward the Firefly Lord either. He's upstairs, treating that red beard from the tribunal. Saul remembered the chaotic aura and radiation that had come from overhead earlier, only now noticing that somehow those oppressive influences had disappeared. When you came in just now, you should have all gone upstairs. What happened there? Did you find the storm eye? Ophelia seemed to find this boring, and had already retreated back into Pear's palm. Pear stepped forward and kicked Clark, then pulled Saul outside. Our intelligence was wrong, Pear said quietly to Saul. Although it seemed similar, the anomaly in the manor wasn't a storm eye. Saul felt puzzled. Don't you have instruments that can test for storm eyes? The testing equipment can detect fluctuations similar to storm eyes, but still requires manual confirmation. Clark and Herbert originally planned to wait outside for your preliminary confirmation before entering the manor to seal the storm eye, but just now the manor suddenly showed. Pear lowered her voice even more. The aura of the abyss appeared. We were afraid you had accidentally triggered the storm eye, causing it to reach a critical point early, so we rushed in. But who would have thought there was no breakthrough point at all, no storm eye? The anomaly there seemed to be artificial pollution, and I suspect someone deliberately created abyssal pollution to lure us into old days manor. Fake, Saul's brow furrowed deeply. Who would know you were searching for storm eyes and could obtain pollution materials with abyssal aura? Has that pollution source been dealt with by you? Saul wanted to go take a look. This person had almost simultaneously calculated against the three major third-rank wizards of the borderland, and even caused deaths among people from both the Tribunal and Stargate Council. This was quite a big move. If discovered in the future, wouldn't that be equivalent to making enemies with the entire world? By now they had left the basement. Saul looked back at the inside. Kismet hadn't immediately followed them out, but instead, he was actually holding Lucy's severed head that had rolled on the ground, trying to reattach it to her body. A bizarre scene occurred. When Kismet brought Lucy's head close to her body, dense silver metallic threads grew from the neck breaks above and below. These metallic threads intertwined with each other, fused together, then generated strong suction with a bang sound, connecting Lucy's upper and lower neck. Then Lucy opened her eyes with a soft hem. Did I faint? Lucy opened her eyes in confusion, seeing Kismet's smiling face right in front of her. Ah, Lucy immediately struggled out of Kismet's embrace, looking at him with terror. You. Kismet smiled like a gentleman. Don't be afraid, Miss Lucy. The three third-rank wizards of the borderland came in just now and dealt with the maddening radiation waves. I've regained my sanity now and won't hurt you anymore. Unfortunately, Lucy already had a bad impression of Kismet and completely didn't believe his words. HMPH, she snorted coldly, but this time didn't speak sarcastically, because after the recent chase and escape, she had recognized the gap between herself and Kismet. She looked around, hopping to find someone to rely on, and immediately saw Clark lying on the ground with only smooth skin where his eyes used to be. Even though Lucy tried hard to calm herself down, she still screamed when she saw Clark, who had been so imposing just moments ago, now in this state. Clark, what happened to Clark? Where are his eyes? Kismet immediately showed a regretful expression. Sorry, when I came looking after regaining consciousness, he was already like this. It seems he was severely injured in the battle with the Wind Sprite. After all, Clark had actively attacked the Wind Sprite, so being injured by her counterattack was something even his backing Stargate Council couldn't complain about. And the Wind Sprite had the identity of being Ophelia's sister, so normally nothing would happen to her. Kismet's expression was gentle as he softly comforted Lucy. "Miss Lucy, don't worry. Although the Wind Sprite severely injured Lord Clark, he is after all from your Stargate Council. She won't exterminate us completely, just leaving us here to fend for ourselves. Lord Clark's condition is still unstable, so we should leave first." This was Lucy's first time having so much contact with Kismet. Previously, after learning that her good friends had died due to Kismet's schemes, she had always harbored resentment toward him. However, the current Kismet didn't seem as bad as she had thought. Miss Lucy, may I ask why you disliked me so much before?" Kismet helped Lucy up while being careful to maintain distance, like a true gentleman. Lucy bit her lip and after a moment said quietly, "You once caused the death of 2 of my friends." "Is that so? I'm truly sorry." At an angle Lucy couldn't see, Kismet's smile slowly spread. Chapter 632, Gathering at the Tower Top. "Miss Lucy, Saul asked somewhat hesitantly. She's a magical construct." But it was Ophelia inside Payer's body who answered Saul. Lucy's identity isn't a secret among the Stargate Council's upper echelons. Even the 2 fourth ranks of their rival tribunal know about it. However, she herself is unaware of this, otherwise her poor little head probably couldn't handle so many contradictions. Ophelia's voice carried amusement, but her words were exceptionally cold. After being transformed, she once died at Kismet's hands. Well, now it's twice. Kismet really was vile. A second-rank magical construct. The one who created her was probably that powerful Stargate Council chairman. Ophelia didn't deny it. Saul stopped paying attention to Kismet and Lucy. Since Lucy was completely unaware of her own identity and couldn't bear the information that she wasn't a real person, even if Saul told her the truth, she would probably forget it quickly. Otherwise, she couldn't have gone this long without having any suspicion about her identity. And Kismet was obviously going to use this point to deceive Lucy. Saul and Payer left the basement and went straight up the spiral staircase to the top floor. The chaotic radiation came from this place just now. Payer stepped forward and pointed at the room's ceiling. But Saul didn't immediately follow Payer's arm to look, instead first scanning the entire room. He had been here before too. At first, he thought this was the tower top where the anomaly had occurred according to the little girl, but later realized that for him being in a different space, this actually belonged to the bottom floor of the house. However, as the third ranks continued to enter, the disguised scene briefly revealed the true scenario due to magnetic field disruption, and only then did Saul discover that this manor had another layer of inversion. In other words, people caught by the little girl upon entering Old Day's manor entered the innermost layer of the manor. Although Saul hadn't entered the innermost layer when he approached Old Day's manor, the scene before his eyes had already changed once, meaning he was actually in the pseudo-surface layer at that time. Outside the pseudo-surface layer, the space where the giant rat existed was actually the real surface layer of this world. Now that Saul had returned here again, he felt quite emotional. The first thing he saw was Brando, who had lost a leg and was sitting in a corner of the room. When the other party saw Saul, a flash of joy passed through his eyes, but he quickly restrained it and didn't communicate with Saul. In the depths of the room, a bald giant man in bright yellow armor was looking at Red Beard with displeasure. Red Beard sat on the ground, pale-faced, but since he had survived until now, the problem shouldn't be serious. There was no one else in the room. Herbert was somewhat surprised to see Payer enter, while Clark was nowhere to be found. His gaze toward Saul also carried more scrutiny. "Where's Clark?" Payer crossed her arms and snorted coldly, threw him in the basement. "He's still alive." "Of course, otherwise you would have felt it." At the level of third-rank wizards, if one died completely, the imbalance of power within their body would explode into massive magical chaos and powerful radiation that could be felt for several kilometers around. Herbert naturally understood this point. His question now was just instinctive concern. The other people in the room didn't speak. Normally, when third-rank wizards were communicating, they had no right to speak. However, Herbert then turned his attention to Saul. "You're Saul." Saul calmly nodded, but immediately began thinking about why Herbert had turned to him. Herbert's expression became serious, naturally emanating a scorching and suffocating aura. "You've been in a different space from others ever since entering the manor. That means you had the best opportunity to set up the fake Storm Eye." Without a word, Payer immediately released a gust of wind to dispel the heat. She seemed to want to explain for Saul, but Saul squeezed her finger and spoke up proactively. "Having the best opportunity doesn't necessarily mean being the one who acted. Firefly Lord, when you entered, you should have also discovered that this old days manor has overlapping spaces. There are 3 inverted spaces in total. When I entered, I wasn't with the others." Saul then recounted his experiences after entering the manor. There was nothing that needed to be kept secret anyway. Payer naturally spoke up for Saul. "When we entered, we had already discovered the fake Storm Eye appeared in the innermost layer, but Saul never reached the innermost layer. He's the least likely person to have forged the Storm Eye." Seeing that Herbert showed no change in expression, Payer knew the other party wouldn't believe easily, so she was naturally too lazy to continue explaining. At this time, Saul looked at Redbeard and asked, "Lord Redbeard, I just saw Lord Bluehair's monocle in the basement. Do you know if he was with you?" Redbeard raised his head and said in surprise, "We separated not long after entering, and he never appeared afterward." Saul showed a regretful expression and said meaningfully, "Perhaps when you have time, you could go to the basement to look at a dead rat." Redbeard immediately understood Saul's meaning, but he didn't show much sadness. Instead, he asked Saul, "Did you see Mummy Wizard?" Saul shook his head and looked around the tower again. "I haven't seen Mummy Wizard or that short wizard." Brando, sitting by the door, spoke up at this time. "Dulut, the short wizard you mentioned, failed when trying to escape the innermost space and is already dead." After thinking, Brando also asked, "Has anyone seen Miss Lucy?" "I'm here." This time it was Lucy walking up from the stairwell, actively answering Brando's question. Seeing Lucy safe and sound, Brando's face under his helmet showed a smile, but then he saw Kismet walking behind Lucy. The smile on his face immediately disappeared. However, Brando wasn't stupid enough to act rashly when 2 third ranks were present, and Lucy appeared to be uncontrolled on the surface. He just said coldly, "Miss Lucy, why are you with Kismet?" After entering Old Days Manor, he had spent most of his time with Lucy fighting against Kismet, even losing one body. Later he separated from Lucy to escape, but Kismet had decisively chosen to pursue Lucy. This hurt Brando's self-esteem somewhat. Lord Kismet said he was previously affected by chaotic radiation, which is why he attacked us. Brando didn't believe it at all. "He's so powerful, how could he be more affected than you and me?" Kismet spread his hands. "Maybe it's because I was closest to the fake Storm Eye when it first erupted." Everyone's gaze turned to Kismet. The latter showed no discomfort and even took the initiative to say, "But I'm not the one who set up the fake Storm Eye. I actually followed someone to the tower top, and when I couldn't find any trace of him here, I was preparing to leave. Just as I walked down 2 flights of stairs, I was suddenly affected by the chaotic radiation and suddenly, wanted to kill everyone. Redbeard immediately asked, "Who did you follow into the tower?" Kismet tilted his head. "Do I even need to say? Of course it was your companion, that mummy wizard." Chapter 633. The Madman Strikes, Leaving No Survivors. While everyone was discussing and analyzing who had set up the fake Storm Eye and why they would do such a thing, 5 floors away from the others, Clark, lying in the basement, finally braced himself against the ground and slowly sat up. He touched his face and gasped violently. "Hefty." The world around him was left with only darkness. He slowly ran his hands over the bridge of his nose but didn't touch his eyes. Even the eye sockets had disappeared. Clark's fingers were trembling. This wasn't simply about losing his eyes. If he had only lost his eyes, he could make himself grow new ones or transplant them at any time. But what he had permanently lost now was one of his 5 senses, vision. The very existence of eyes had been permanently erased from his being. However, now, apart from knowing that he had actively given up his vision and actively erased part of his memories, he couldn't remember anything else. After a brief emotional fluctuation, Clark calmed down again. He sat on the ground, not in a hurry to get up, but tried to enter a brief sleep to trace his connection with the wind sprite. After a moment, he slowly revealed a smile, thinking, "The connection buried in the wind sprite's dream is still there. Just need to be more careful this time. Must persuade the chairman to help me convince Ophelia to leave. And that's all. This incident definitely has something to do with him too. I need to find a way to transfer him away." The brief failure didn't make Clark give up. He was even already planning his next move. Becoming a 4th-rank wizard wasn't an easy thing. Planning for hundreds of years was quite normal. If it weren't for the Stargate Council supporting Clark from behind, he wouldn't even think about becoming 4th rank now. Similarly, since he had already reached an agreement with Stargate Council Chairman Alec, Clark wouldn't give up on advancement. He didn't even plan to change targets. However, just as Clark was reformulating his plan, steady footsteps suddenly appeared. Clark tilted his head, his brows gradually furrowing. Before the footsteps appeared at the basement door, he hadn't noticed anything at all. Not only that, the mental power and magical fluctuations emanating from the other party were very unfamiliar. He searched through his memories, but couldn't find anything similar. No, there was one. Although not quite the same, this aura had once left a deep impression on him. Clark suddenly stood up, facing the door, syllables slowly escaping from his mouth. "Gorsa." Gorsa still walked forward unhurriedly. As he moved, the shadow behind him gradually rose, extending to the door and slowly sealing the entire entrance. All light disappeared. Gorsa slowly peeled off the rotting skin from his face, and his deformed features gradually recovered, returning to their originally handsome appearance. "I've worn this skin for a long time. Finally, I can take it off." He changed from a mummy-like wizard to the handsome madman of the Glare family. It's just that of the people present. One couldn't see and one didn't care. Gorsa came before Clark, his voice still gentle without much fluctuation. "Long time no see, Clark. When we parted last time, what were we talking about?" Clark pressed his lips together and didn't speak. Gorsa waited a moment, then continued, "Oh, I remember." He stepped forward, standing beside Clark, close to his ear. "I said then, if you provoke me again, I'll kill you." In the darkness, Clark's fists instantly clenched. Clark and Gorsa hadn't seen each other for nearly 100 years. He had even entered the 3rd rank earlier than Gorsa. But their experiences, when both were 2nd rank still, left an indelible impression on Clark. He even was really somewhat afraid of him. Gorsa, other 3rd ranks aren't allowed to enter the borderland. After a pause, he couldn't help but explain, "Besides, when did I ever provoke you?" "First question," Gorsa raised one finger. I'm currently second rank. He wasn't lying. At this moment, he was emanating pure dark attribute energy. Not a trace of Glare family characteristics could be seen. Second question, didn't you know that Saul is my student? Hearing this, Clark knew today wouldn't end well. He immediately attacked, and milky white shell wind chimes suddenly appeared throughout the room. These wind chimes moved without wind, while making no sound at all. In the completely dark room, Gorsa naturally couldn't see them either. But strangely, Gorsa's form instantly became a thin black shadow, precisely dodging all the swaying wind chimes. Then the black shadow suddenly merged into the ground, like a real shadow. Though there was almost no light, the shadow still existed. Clark couldn't see Gorsa's movements, but he knew that once he started fighting, the other party definitely wouldn't let it go. The moment the wind chimes appeared, he flew into midair, then released extremely pure magical power outward with his current maximum energy. This magical power was silent and soundless, transforming into a terrifying force the moment it left Clark's spiritual body. Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. The wind chimes suddenly rang. The environment hadn't changed, still the same room. The lighting hadn't changed, still couldn't see anything. But this place had already changed from reality to a dream. Clark landed back on the ground. Now, although I'm injured, you've limited your strength to second rank. Comparatively, I still have the advantage. Even in the dream he created, Clark still couldn't see anything. This was the price of losing vision. However, Clark had already adapted to days without images. He had begun using other senses and his unique nightmare power to perceive this world. In his dream, he was the controller of everything. However, after feeling the feedback from the dream, Clark's mouth pressed tightly together. He hadn't found any trace of Gorsa's existence. After thinking for a moment, he said, "This world has no light at all." The already dim room became a degree deeper. Without light, there is no darkness. In my dream, how can you use the power of darkness? Clark suddenly became somewhat excited. If he could devour Gorsa, even if it would offend the Glare family, as long as he became fourth rank, what did offending them matter? He could completely establish a new family and thoroughly replace the Glare family. However, just as he began to harbor some delusions, Gorsa's voice completely shattered his beautiful dream. "Interesting, don't you know that I am light?" A beam of light like a giant searchlight suddenly shone on Clark's face. Behind him, a huge elongated shadow appeared simultaneously. Light and darkness were never opposites but symbiotic. If you can't even understand this point, even if you become fourth rank, you'll forever be trapped in this world. Light and shadow simultaneously move toward the center. The stronger the light, the darker the shadow. The two actually gradually enveloped Clark together, and the latter only realized what Gorsa was doing just before being completely devoured. "You actually want to fuse? You're insane." Clark immediately tried to change the dream, but he had already been completely enveloped by Gorsa without realizing it. Light and darkness suddenly bent and rotated at extremely high speed. Consciousness, cognition, emotions, and soul energy simultaneously became a huge whirlpool, completely twisting Clark. 3 minutes later, Gorsa returned to human form, and all the milky white shell wind chimes in the room disappeared. Gorsa clapped his hands together, eyes narrowing. The simulated abyssal vortex is indeed very powerful. The sensation was wrong. He looked down to find his hands had actually fused together. When he forcefully tore them apart, flesh and blood separated with a rip sound, falling to the ground. But they quickly turned into black shadows and remerged into Gorsa's body. The side effects are also severe, polluted by an abyssal aura in such a short time. Gorsa didn't mind. "Then I'll go see a doctor. Conveniently, I know a very capable little fellow." Chapter 634, Prophecy Fulfilled, Everyone in Danger. A violent and chaotic magical power suddenly rose from beneath their feet. Everyone who was discussing who had forged the fake Storm Eye immediately felt a chill in their hearts. Clark, Herbert immediately transformed into soaring fireflies and rushed out of the room, flying toward the basement everyone had described. Saul and Payer exchanged glances, both having the same thought. The person who forged the fake Storm Eye has killed Clark. Now there's only one person not present. Saul took a few steps to Redbeard. Lord Redbeard, how much do you know about the mummy wizard? Redbeard's throat moved. We only know each other's code names. However, I've worked with Blue Hair for a relatively long time, so I also know his public identity. But Mummy Wizard, he's a tribunal judge transferred from another city. He completed several missions very beautifully and was very sensitive to pollution, so we invited him to investigate the Storm Eye together. Redbeard's eyes widened. Oh no, Herbert went down alone. Could he be in danger? He wasn't really worried about Herbert, just afraid that if the Firefly Lord was also taken down, wouldn't the rest of them be in even more danger? Just as he was thinking this, the fireflies had already flown back to the tower top. Herbert's bald head reappeared, but his expression had darkened several degrees. Clark is dead, and his head has been taken by someone. Herbert walked up to Payer and questioned, "When you left, were you certain Clark was still alive?" Payer directly pointed at Lucy. "The young lady of the Stargate Council can testify for us." Lucy was also full of shock at this moment. Just feeling the magical rampage of a third-rank wizard, she regretted not staying by Clark's side. However, when Herbert actually brought back news of Clark's death, she was grateful that Kismet had brought her to the tower top, together with the other two third ranks. Otherwise, someone who could kill Clark in such a short time wouldn't even need the blink of an eye to kill her. Yes, I can confirm that when Kismet and I left, although Clark was still unconscious, his condition had stabilized and he should have woken up soon. Speaking of this, Lucy proposed another guess. Could it be related to him losing his eyes? Lost his eyes? Herbert's expression changed again. He looked at Payer. Clark lost his eyes. Payer said coldly, rather he lost his vision, but he deserved it. The prophecy came true, but it's not quite right either. Clark shouldn't have died. Herbert was more worried about another matter. If Clark had lost both eyes, would he also transform into flames filling the sky in the future? That flame form was obviously not his normal state. Moreover, he had once thought the one falling toward the stars was the fake wind sprite. But now, the real wind sprite had obviously returned, so who exactly did the giant bird in the prophecy refer to? The Storm Eye matter was already making people panic, and adding that obviously unhappy ending future. Herbert rushed to Redbeard, finally no longer being so polite to him. Before you came, did anyone else enter Old Days Manor? Redbeard quickly shook his head. Lucy also said, the Wind Sprites people were guarding there early on. Their previous team was completely wiped out. Before we entered, they had already sealed off the entire manor. Then no one entered. Herbert turned around, his gaze sweeping over everyone. Unless the killer prepared an ambush in Old Days Manor months in advance, he could only have entered the manor together with you. Redbeard quickly said. Saul analyzed that the person might be the mummy wizard. Although he didn't want to implicate tribunal personnel in this matter, finding the killer was obviously more important now. Otherwise, they might all die here. Herbert thought for a moment, then immediately said to Payer, how many people do you have outside? Payer said very certainly, they've been sealing off the entire manor. Then we'll go out now and seal off the entire manor. No matter what, we must trap him to death here. Herbert had obviously lost interest in the fake Storm Eye and just wanted to leave as soon as possible. The group had entered with full confidence, but left with their own thoughts. Since Payer's identity was already semi-public, she returned Anne to Saul. Then she went with Herbert to question the subordinates sealing off the manor about whether anyone else had come out of the manor before them. Saul watched from afar as several of Payer's subordinates shook their heads, obviously having made no discoveries. But he was skeptical about whether these first and second-rank wizards could detect someone escaping from the manor. Moreover, Saul also thought that Herbert's eagerness to come out probably wasn't entirely to seal the killer in the manor. He probably also thought the killer had already left. Doing this now might just be to give the Tribunal and Stargate Council an explanation, then go back and figure out how to change his future. Master, Anne missed you so much. Anne, still in Payer's maid's body, directly pounced over and hugged Saul. Seeing Payer's maid throwing herself at Saul, the others looked at him with new respect. Lucy frowned, thinking that Saul was Payer's lover yet still had relations with Payer's maid. Indeed, the borderland was much more chaotic than the Stargate Council. She turned her head and saw Kismet standing beside her. Suddenly feeling that her previous understanding of the world and people might have been too narrow. It would be better to get out and walk around more in the future. Redbeard had no mood to pay attention to others' lifestyle preferences. 3 of them had been entrusted with important tasks, but one died and one went missing, and the missing one was very likely the betrayer of this mission. He still had to think about how to report back and shift responsibility away. Brando and Saul exchanged glances and were the first to leave Old Days Manor. Saul waited for Payer for a while. About half an hour later, Payer walked over angrily. Blue hair and the short wizard's bodies appeared, broken into hundreds of pieces, but Mummy Wizard's body didn't appear. We can basically confirm he's the insider who forged the Storm Eye and killed Clark. The Mummy Wizard should have already escaped, Saul said to Payer. The commotion from killing Clark was too big. Unless he's stupid, he knows he should leave. Otherwise, what awaits him is all of us hunting him down. Payer nodded. Herbert also thinks the other party might have already escaped, but he's still being stubborn, insisting I send people to guard Old Days Manor. I only have 1 second-rank wizard left to deploy. But Saul smiled and consoled her. Since the enemy has most likely already left Old Days Manor, guarding here isn't bad either. You can just push the task of hunting down Mummy Wizard to Herbert. Payer's eyes lit up and all her previous frustration dissipated. Great, then I'll go over there. This matter will probably involve a lot of arguing. You go back first. She said to Saul in secret language. After all, you were invaded by Clark's dream. Go back and thoroughly check your body. Don't leave any hidden dangers. Watching Payer walk away, Saul returned with Anne. This time out, he had brought many potions and took all the consciousness bodies with him. But Old Days Manor was different from what he had imagined, and many things weren't used. Instead, when caught by Clark and confirming the other party was trying to invade his dream, Saul had all consciousness bodies returned to the diary to avoid being discovered by Clark. Now, although Clark was already dead to be safe, Saul still hadn't let the others out. He flew back to Rhine Lake with Anne. Just as he landed outside the mushroom forest, he saw Marsh rushing out of the mushroom forest with a "you're finally back" expression. Could it be that someone broke into the tower while I was away? Saul's heart tightened, and he immediately landed. What's wrong, Marsh? Tower Master that. That Tower Master, no, the old Tower Master, no, the original, the former Tower Master has come. Chapter 635, Surprise Inspection. Saul looked at Marsh in shock. Behind Marsh was the gradually thinning mist of Rhine Lake over the years. Through that thin mist, Saul seemed to see someone sitting in front of the wizard tower. For some reason, he suddenly felt nervous. As if on the first day of school the teacher said, "Everyone put away your books, We're having a placement test. Wait, that's not right. The borderland prohibits outside third-rank wizards from entering at will. How did my master get in? A thought suddenly flashed through Saul's mind, instantly making his scalp tingle. He immediately said to Marsh beside him, "From now on, close the passages in the mushroom forest. No one is allowed to enter." However, considering Marsh's combat ability, having him stop someone who wanted to force their way in wasn't very realistic. So Saul changed his words. "Just say I'm recovering my mental power. If someone insists on forcing their way in, use spores to warn me." Marsh quickly nodded, then ran to the mushroom forest to make arrangements. Saul took a deep breath, put Anne into his diary, then stepped onto the ice of Rhine Lake. Despite being somewhat nervous, Saul's pace wasn't slow. Soon he could clearly see the person under the wizard tower. It was indeed his indescribable master, Gorsa. At this moment, Gorsa was wearing pure black wizard robes and wasn't wearing a hood, just sitting openly in a soft sofa that one could sink halfway into. He wore a smile, watching Saul approach step by step. Only when Saul stepped onto the soil of Lake Island did he raise his hand. "Long time no see, Saul." "Long time no see, master." Saul walked up to Gorsa and stopped. "Why didn't you wait for me inside the wizard tower?" Saul extended his arm, inviting Gorsa to enter the Purity Wizard Tower. Gorsa rose as if without gravity, casually putting away the huge and comfortable pink sofa. "This is already your wizard tower. Without the master's permission, I naturally shouldn't enter casually." Beside them, Steward Hope stood with hands lowered, head slightly bowed. Gorsa added jokingly, "But even if I wanted to enter, Hope wouldn't agree." Hope smiled politely and bowed again. If Gorsa really insisted on entering the wizard tower, even knowing he couldn't stop him, he would still try his best to obstruct. However, Gorsa was really very considerate in certain aspects and didn't make such a request of Hope at all. Saul led Gorsa into the wizard tower and suddenly said something. "Actually, master, you've been here once before, haven't you?" Gorsa turned his head and said with a smile, "Yes, last time it was also you who led me in." "Indeed." Saul suppressed the complexity in his heart and led Gorsa to the first basement level. Camus in the corner was still very happy to see Saul. When Saul wasn't there, no one came to study magic with her. However, she then saw Gorsa. At this moment, Gorsa wasn't wearing any disguise. Camus, who had just wanted to greet Saul, immediately retreated, sat down, hugged her knees, and pretended to be a soul body that knew nothing. However, Gorsa didn't let her off. Camus, so you ran here." Saul had already learned of Camus's identity from the steward before, and since Gorsa had already seen Camus when he was disguised as Mummy, Saul naturally brought him here. However, facing Gorsa, Camus had no intention of communicating with him and didn't say a word. "I discovered her when digging the basement after establishing the wizard tower." Saul proactively told the story of how he and Camus met. He actually also wanted to understand why the former tower master of the wizard tower had appeared underground in the borderland. "Is that so?" Gorsa looked at Camus with great interest. "She originally fell into the sea and disappeared outside the Sighing Wall in the far north." Light danced in Gorsa's eyes. "Did you actually escape directly from the black tide and come here? How did you get here?" Gorsa slowly walked up to Camus and squatted down. "You're not hiding here to avoid the Sighing Wall mission, are you?" "Huh." Only then did Saul learn that Camus had actually disappeared in the far north. Camus was finally forced to raise her head. "I'm already dead. Dead people don't need to bear responsibilities." Gorsa was momentarily stunned by this response. He touched his chin, stood up again, and turned back to Saul with spread hands. "She makes such a reasonable point." Saul asked puzzledly, "Master, what are the Black Tide and Sighing Wall?" He had some guesses, but still wanted a more definite answer. "Since we're going to chat, let's sit down comfortably and talk." Gorsa snapped his fingers, and the pink single sofa appeared again. "You sit too. Do you still have the sofa I gave you?" "Yes." Saul took out his sofa and awkwardly sat down as well. For some reason, sitting in this kind of soft sofa in front of Camus felt slightly shameful, as if the serious academic atmosphere had suddenly been broken. But Gorsa felt completely natural, and had already begun telling Saul about the relationship between the Sighing Wall and Black Tide. "Have you heard the term Abyssal Eye?" Saul nodded. "I heard it from a wizard from Nefrit continent. He said the tribunal was established to prevent the expansion of the Abyssal Eye. Actually, he learned about it through Guido and his diary, though the other party was indeed from Nefrit continent." Gorsa raised his eyebrows. "Your information is quite in-depth. Do you know anything else?" "Almost nothing else." "That's quite one-sided then." Gorsa's eyes curved. "To mention the Abyssal Eye and Sighing Wall, I must first explain what the Abyss is." The Abyss was a deep-sea whirlpool in the endless ocean on the other side of the world. It was said that in the Dark Moon era, the age before the current lunar calendar era, when the Abyss first appeared, it was just a small whirlpool. So small that ordinary sailing ships could easily break free. Although it also posed pollution dangers at that time, because the harm wasn't great, it didn't even attract the attention of accompanying wizards. But soon, it grew into the terrifying Abyssal Eye within just a few decades. When the top wizards of that time failed to eliminate the pollution after several attempts, they decided to completely destroy the whirlpool. Who would have thought that this collective action would bring catastrophic results? The Abyss suddenly erupted, actually directly swallowing the continent closest to it. Almost all those who participated in destroying the whirlpool died. Even those who survived suffered extremely terrible pollution and died one after another over the following 100 years. This also caused a gap in the wizard advancement pathway of this world. Later, people designated the day the whirlpool pacified as the new calendar system, which was the lunar calendar era. The current fourth-rank wizards almost all entered the fourth rank during the lunar calendar era. They weren't personally involved in the abyssal eruption, but were obviously deeply influenced by their elders or masters. Gorsa quietly recounted the inside information he knew. Although the Abyssal Eye now only has small-scale eruptions, it still creates huge tsunamis every few years. These tsunamis also hide terrible monsters from the seabed. The most powerful monsters require even third-rank wizards to work together to eliminate. That's why the tall Sighing Wall was built in the far north of Stat Continent, and the south of Nefrit was planted with man-eating Red Sea trees. These two places are where tsunami attacks are most frequent and violent. Escaper Continent, between these two continents, is responsible for using islands to dissipate weaker tsunami aftershocks. But currently, we can only make these defensive measures and hope in our hearts that the Abyss won't erupt on a large scale again. Whoa, Saul was deeply shocked. Can we only hope? Then if the Abyss erupts on a large scale again? Gorsa smiled, spreading his hands. This world would probably be destroyed. Chapter 636, Conditions for Third Rank. When bringing up the topic of the world possibly being destroyed, Gorsa's emotions were quite stable. He even said to Saul, "Actually, this matter cannot be told to ordinary third-rank wizards. Since you know about it early, think carefully about your future path." Future path. After the world-destroying Abyss appeared, the wizard world was roughly divided into two factions. One faction fears the Abyss and only wants to escape. They formed the Stargate Council on Escaper Continent. The other faction completely submits to the Abyss, only thinking about how to better appease it. They established the tribunal. Today, he actually learned the reasons for the establishment of the two major forces from his master. It's just that the reasons for establishing the two most powerful forces in the current wizard world weren't very glorious. The Stargate Council was better at least. They were trying to find ways to survive. But how would they escape? Wandering continents. Perhaps it was related to the word Stargate in the Stargate Council. But the tribunal was somewhat ridiculous. Could submitting to the abyss prevent it from erupting again? Or was there some other hidden truth? And because Master Gorsa belonged to the Stargate Council faction, his account lacked fairness. However, looking at his master in front of him, Saul remembered that Clark had very likely died at his hands. He suddenly felt that Master Gorsa might not care about these things at all. I'm telling you this to let you know that as long as you're in this world, you can't avoid the struggle between the two major forces, especially in the borderland, which is of utmost importance. Now that Clark is dead, the Stargate Council has lost the third-rank wizard under its control and will definitely support another one. However, outside third-rank wizards might face joint exclusion from Herbert and Payer, so the Stargate Council's greater possibility is to find someone here who can advance to third rank. After speaking, Gorsa stared straight at Saul. Saul suddenly understood Gorsa's meaning. He actually wanted him to advance to third rank. But Saul had just advanced to second rank a few months ago. He had no clue how to advance to third rank. How could he become the Stargate Council's representative in the borderland? With complex feelings, Saul actively changed the topic. Master, did you kill Clark? Gorsa had no intention of hiding anything from Saul and directly nodded in acknowledgement. But wasn't Clark from the Stargate Council? What does the Stargate Council's plan have to do with me? Besides, their plan was to wait for my family's old man to die and then replace his position. Gorsa's smile became cold. The Glare family's fourth-rank vacancy should naturally be filled by someone from the Glare family. That old man should be able to hold on until I become fourth rank. Saul couldn't help but ask, Master, didn't you also just advance? Gorsa shook his finger. A wizard's strength comes from his knowledge, not his age. I have now determined my direction and firmly believe that as long as I continue down this path, I can successfully advance. He leaned forward slightly. Saul, you also can't slack off. Within 1 year, advance to third rank. Otherwise, you'll only become a sacrifice in the resource struggle of the borderland. Third rank. Saul's brain's first reaction was that it was impossible, but his body had already begun trembling with excitement. Master, what exactly needs to be achieved to advance from second to third rank? Gorsa touched his chin. Haven't I told you before? You told me roughly what third and fourth ranks are like. It had to be said that Gorsa was really relaxed as a master, having barely given Saul a few lessons. Most of Saul's advancement knowledge could only be learned through reading books. Gorsa chuckled and immediately explained the most crucial point for third-rank wizards. Third-rank wizards can destroy a city with one strike. To achieve this level, relying solely on mental power and magical fluctuations within the body isn't enough. So after focusing too much on internal conditions, we need to communicate with the outside world. The most important step in advancing from second to third rank is opening a door within your spiritual body, directly channeling external elemental particles into your body, then tamming and using them in the shortest time. Saul understood. Actually, where third ranks were stronger than second ranks was that second ranks could only use magic within their bodies. No matter how much they accumulated normally, it was still limited. But third ranks could mobilize external elemental particles, quickly converting them into magic within their bodies. No wonder they said third-rank wizards could destroy a city with one strike. However, Gorsa soon told him about things to be careful of. But you need to be careful. Opening that door in your body is also very dangerous. After you find the existence of the door within your body, you must open it slowly. It greatly tests your locator and mental power. After the door in your body is opened, what flows in from outside includes not only elemental particles but also impurities, and even various pollutions in poor environments. If your locator cannot help you stabilize your consciousness, you might be directly polluted after opening the door. At the same time, mental power will help you control the door within your body, so you won't be unable to open it or be unable to close it after opening. Gorsa rarely looked serious, but when he saw Saul also becoming cautious, the corners of his mouth turned up again. However, I'm not worried about your mental power. For someone who could separate his soul for an entire night during his apprentice period and return to his body without any aftereffects, was there any need to worry about his mental power? But I don't understand your locator. Whether it can withstand the pollution and impurities brought in when external elemental particles flood in depends on your own judgment. Locator Saul was thoughtful. Actually, he was even less worried about his own locator. Saul suddenly felt like he might really be able to advance to third rank within a year. However, on the surface, Saul still gritted his teeth and made a determined expression of facing death fearlessly. I understand, Master. I will definitely work hard and complete the advancement as soon as possible. While Gorsa was rarely teaching Saul, Payer and Herbert still hadn't left Old Days Manor. They guarded outside, sending people in again to investigate the situation inside. But this time, the manor had lost its multi-dimensional space characteristics. It was very likely that the previous entry of third and second rank wizards had caused irreparable damage to the manor. Therefore, everyone confirmed that the person who forged the fake Storm Eye had long left the manor without being detected by the low-rank wizards outside. Adding that no body of the mummy wizard had been found so far, suspicion towards him was very high. Herbert and Payer jointly issued a wanted order for him and sent this news back to the tribunal. The tribunal would very likely continue sending people to investigate. After all, the rule of not entering the borderland had already been broken, and it would be very difficult to observe it again. Orders had been issued. Herbert found Payer first. Congratulations on surviving. Payer snorted coldly. Regardless, the borderland needs a third-rank wizard. Payer's heart stirred. I have an idea. Herbert didn't listen to her finish at all. If you're talking about Saul, then don't bother mentioning it. Why, are only you and Clark allowed to form alliances? That Saul looks like he just advanced to second rank. When will he become third rank? 5 years? 10 years? Without 3 third ranks to suppress it, the current peace in the borderland might not last even 2 years. Herbert felt he was already thinking highly of Saul, by guessing he would need at least 5 years to advance. Ordinary second-rank wizards might not even be able to advance in their lifetime. Chapter 637, Red Sea Trees and Black Sea Trees. Payer wasn't clear whether Saul could advance within 2 years, but she knew that the selection of the third rank must be careful. At least, they couldn't let anyone join forces with Herbert to suppress her again. She might need Ophelia's help. Regardless of who the final candidate was, she couldn't show weakness now. If the Stargate Council can forcibly create a 4th rank, why can't we forcibly create a 3rd rank? The Stargate Council certainly can, but can you? Even facing the real wind sprite, Herbert's tone remained impolite. But then he said self-mockingly, although we are 3rd rank, because we're in the borderland, we must be cautious even when releasing large-scale magic to prevent internal pollution from worsening. Where do we have the momentum of outside 3rd-rank wizards who can move mountains and drain seas with a wave of their hand? Speaking of this, Herbert suddenly asked Payer thoughtfully, Did Wizard Saul really help you purify the pollution in your body? Peyer said vaguely. He only used a very short time to clear the pollution. Although he can't completely eradicate it, it can greatly reduce the burden on the body. He seems to have great insight into cleaning pollution in the borderland. When using the old witch's body, Peyer had witnessed Saul's ability to absorb pollution without being infected. It's just that she didn't have the ability to investigate then, and she hasn't found an opportunity now. After returning to her real body, Peyer used the old witch's special body to repair her originally crack-filled form. But at the same time, the pollution originally in her body also returned to her. However, strangely, since she and Saul had in-depth discussions about how to counterattack Clark, she rarely suffered from internal pollution anymore. She wanted to figure out whether this was her imagination, but hadn't mustered the courage yet. Confirming Saul's ability, Herbert relented. If he's really that capable, becoming third rank wouldn't be bad. At least there's a suitable reason that borderland wizards can accept. It's just that the Stargate Council might not be willing to have the third wizard come from other forces. Peyer immediately said, "He doesn't count as other forces. Don't forget his master is a genius from another fourth-rank wizard family in the Stargate Council. He's the person from the Glare family most likely to advance to fourth rank." Herbert didn't know much about Gorsa, but had heard some rumors. "I heard he never participates in Glare family or Stargate Council internal affairs." So what if he doesn't participate? His identity already determines his camp. Don't forget, when he was second rank, he could achieve short-distance spatial teleportation without relying on formations. That's a fourth-rank ability. Herbert had to admit he was convinced by Peyer. He even suspected that Peyer's emphasis on Saul was because of Gorsa behind him. Seeing Herbert's serious expression, Peyer secretly breathed a sigh of relief. She didn't care who Gorsa was or whether he was as talented as the rumors said. As long as he could serve as background support for Saul, that was enough. Herbert muttered to himself, "Now that Clark is dead, the Stargate Council definitely won't offend the Glare family for a dead person. They might even do them a favor. Then the next third rank in the borderland really might be Saul." On the other side, Gorsa, who was rarely fulfilling his master duties, now began collecting tuition. "When I came, I heard that Justin had been coming to you for some time to clean himself. Do you know where he went afterward?" His master actually wanted to find Justin, who was wanted by the tribunal. Saul instinctively felt Gorsa was about to cause trouble again. But he seemed to have no position to advise someone to behave properly. Justin should already be dead. Saul told Gorsa about how the fake wind sprite and Herbert had interrogated Justin together, and then he died in the wind sprite cliff nest. "Dead," Gorsa showed a troubled expression. "This is troublesome. Then where would he hide things?" Gorsa actually showed an even more troubled expression than when he admitted to killing Clark. What was Gorsa investigating Justin for? Saul immediately thought of the Black Sea tree source planted on his second basement level. This sentence circled in his mouth several times before finally coming out. "Master, before Justin left my place, he gave me a seed and instructed me to plant it." Gorsa immediately stood up. "Where is it?" Saul pointed downward. Gorsa immediately understood, and his form suddenly disappeared. Saul sat in place, with the opposite side now empty. He blinked. Why didn't his master take him down together this time? Saul had to obediently stand up and jump down from the room corner. He happened to see Gorsa ignoring the black tentacles swaying on the ground, staring intently at a small flower pot suspended in midair. In the flower pot was only a tiny green sprout that had somehow grown two black leaves. Gorsa looked at those tender leaves, a flash of surprise in his eyes. "I didn't expect he would leave this thing to you." He turned back, just seeing Saul, who had just come down, and smiled. It seems he also discovered your unique soul. He discovered what? Saul came closer, suddenly feeling nervous. Saul, just as your soul can ignore bodily rejection, you also seem to have strong resistance to black tide pollution. Gorsa gently licked his lips. Sometimes, I really want to put you on an experiment table. Saul's heart rang with alarm bells, his breathing instantly becoming labored. Master. Gorsa suppressed the expression about to twist on his face. All right, who told you to call me master? Then as tuition, give me 1 leaf of the Black Sea tree source. The pressure on his body suddenly decreased. Saul looked sideways at the small sprout and said without hesitation, Since Justin gave it to me anyway, I'll give it all to you, master. But Gorsa shook his head. I only need 1 leaf, and after this Black Sea tree source grows up, it might help you too. Gorsa carefully used purely physical means to remove 1 black leaf, then carefully sealed the end of the stem. Seeing Gorsa so serious and not using any magic, Saul's curiosity piqued. Master, what exactly is the Black Sea tree source? What's it used for? Remember, I just mentioned that the tribunal plants man-eating trees. Saul nodded. Originally, the tribunal planted Black Sea trees in the South Sea territory, but later they modified them into Red Sea trees. Gorsa smiled, but there was no emotion in his eyes. If the former Black Sea trees used their own characteristics to try to suppress the abyss, then Red Sea trees use human lives to appease the abyss. About Red Sea trees, knowing this much is enough for now. Any more, and I'm afraid you'll end up on the tribunal's purge list. Saul's brow furrowed slightly. Could it be that the tribunal issued judgment orders and elimination, orders everywhere to kill and pursue people in order to feed the Red Sea trees, so the abyss wouldn't erupt? It was just like using maidens' lives to make the sea god calm his anger. Chapter 638, The Borderland. Why can the Red Sea trees appease the violent abyss? Saul didn't quite understand. The high-rank wizards at that time speculated that something exists at the very bottom of the abyssal eye. It's this thing that has been driving the abyss to continuously penetrate deeper into the Earth's layers, and might even drill through to the continents on this side in the future. Even Gorsa's expression became serious when mentioning the abyss. It's said that the borderland was designated by wizards at that time as a place where the abyssal eye might appear. Although the abyssal eye has not appeared to this day, and no one can detect how deep it has penetrated, the borderland has experienced 2 pollution outbreaks. The Stargate people call this kind of outbreak small tides. Each time a small tide appears, large numbers of people die. Do you remember the Baton Academy that left the borderland? Saul nodded. I heard they escaped from the borderland. Gorsa chuckled lightly. Their 3rd-rank wizard at the time was polluted during the last small tide and finally couldn't suppress it, so was driven out by Clark. However, Clark, who enjoyed the resources left by Baton, probably never thought that the next small tide outbreak would come so quickly. Small tide. Master, did you create that fake storm eye? A fake storm eye doesn't affect the existence of a real storm eye. Gorsa leaned back. The appearance of a storm eye means an anchor point is about to appear. Legend says anchor points guide the abyssal eye. Each time an anchor point appears, it accelerates the abyssal eye's progress in breaking through the world. If the black tide pollution carried by the abyss really erupts on this side, the Tribunal and Stargate Council probably have no ability to resist at all. By then, the connections between the 3 continents will be forcibly severed. The Tribunal and Stargate Council will change from each defending one side to being attacked by the black tide from both sides. Saul understood. If such a situation really occurred, the world would quickly be destroyed. The borderland was like a balloon filled with water, with a sharp needle floating inside. ready to pierce the balloon and release all the water at any moment. People enjoyed the coolness of the water balloon while fearing it would burst. Gorsa stood up and instantly put away the pink large sofa. "All right, I've told you almost everything I should. If you don't want to die in the borderland, become third rank as soon as possible. I'll give you a slight push, but the rest depends on yourself." Gorsa spoke vaguely, making Saul's heart feel uneasy. How would he push him? In the next second, before Saul could ask, Gorsa's figure disappeared along with his sofa. However, just as Saul casually put away his own sofa, wanting to discuss advancement with his consciousness bodies, he saw Gorsa's figure appear in the original spot again. Almost forgot one thing. Gorsa extended his right hand toward Saul. Saul looked down and found that Gorsa's right wrist was twisted. His right hand had turned 360 degrees, but looked normal from the surface. Saul didn't know how he had just maintained his movements without any abnormality, making him completely unaware. "I used some methods when killing Clark. This is the aftereffect. Please help me deal with it, Dr. Saul." Saul looked up. "This is caused by pollution." Gorsa nodded casually, as if the polluted person wasn't him. Saul's expression became serious because, just from observation, he found that the pollution on Gorsa was similar to that in the borderland, but the pollution source was more powerful, or rather, pure. But Gorsa had clearly just arrived in the borderland, at most a few months. How could the pollution on him be heavier than some wizards who had stayed in the borderland for years? Saul's index finger transformed into a semi-transparent grayish-white tentacle and touched Gorsa's wrist. The tiny suckers on the tentacle were like small fish mouths, bit by bit nibbling at the air around Gorsa's wrist. But as the suckers opened and closed, tiny particles as black as ink were extracted from Gorsa's wrist and drilled into Saul's tentacle fingertip. In less than half an hour, Saul had absorbed all the black tide pollution in Gorsa's body. When he removed his finger, which had turned charred black, the pollution source inside almost infected his palm through the severed finger wound. Saul immediately sealed the wound with magical power and sealed and preserved the severed finger. "The pollution in your body, does it come from the black tide?" Gorsa nodded and smiled. "Yes, very pure abyssal waves. If not for doing bad things, I wouldn't carry such troublesome stuff." Good grief, innocently saying doing bad things. Saul was speechless. "I'll take this then. If you continue staying in the borderland with it, even if it's already sealed, you might be polluted again. I've completed everything I came to the borderland to do and will leave soon." Gorsa pointed at the sealed bottle in Saul's hand. "But if you like it, I'll give it to you." After speaking, Gorsa's figure disappeared again. Saul put the sealed bottle into another box, inscribed with more powerful sealing magic formations for additional reinforcement. After completing all this, he reviewed today's Pit Clark operation. Unfortunately, this operation was too sudden, and he hadn't prepared to personally participate. If he hadn't been too clear that Clark would definitely be interested in the nightmare butterfly in his body, he might have failed. "It seems I can never consider myself a bystander in the future. Even people who seem to have nothing to do with me can drag me into trouble at any time." Penny had now emerged from dreams about his past but was similarly harmed, currently completely transformed into a deathly silver bookmark, dormant in the diary. About half an hour later, Saul quietly said to the motionless Camus in the corner, "Master Gorsa should have gone far away by now." Camus looked up at the ceiling without saying anything. Although Camus didn't speak, from her slightly relaxed attitude, Gorsa should have indeed gone far away. Only then did Saul breathe a sigh of relief, then sat on a stone chair beside the experiment table that wasn't as soft as a sofa. Master Gorsa disguised himself as a tribunal wizard, secretly entered the borderland, forged a storm eye, and killed Clark. What exactly does he want to do? Saul always felt that Master Gorse's troublemaking this time was to cause even bigger trouble. After Gorse left, Byron finally came out of the third-floor laboratory. He looked at the first basement level with lingering fear. Gone. Saul nodded wearily. Gone. Do you want to rest first or discuss first? Saul rested his arm on the table. Let me tell you what happened. Payer will probably come over later anyway, so I'll wait for her. However, even after Saul finished explaining the entire sequence of events, from speaking to Byron alone to explaining to the steward, Camus, and all the consciousness bodies, Payer never appeared. Instead, on the third day, Saul waited for Brando. Chapter 639, We Are Friends Now. As soon as Brando landed on Lake Island, he loudly congratulated Saul. Congratulations on your successful advancement. Although I already guessed you would definitely succeed, I didn't expect it would go so smoothly. Looking at Saul, who came out of the wizard tower to greet him, Brando performed a greeting ritual between companions. Then he asked with a puzzled expression, "But how did you do it? At first, you even needed me to help you draw away the cliff wizards. I thought you'd be hunted by the wind sprite for at least a year. I didn't expect that when I came back, you'd already taken down the wind sprite." The fake wind sprite matter involved multiple forces, so Saul didn't explain clearly to Brando, simply answering, "We just discovered common interests." Confirming that there would be no more conflicts between Saul and the wind sprite, Brando also felt relieved. Although he had chosen to help Saul initially, that was also a necessary action forced by the need for advancement. If possible, he also didn't want to offend a powerful third-rank wizard. Then, after the pleasantries, Brando got to the main topic. "Can I enter your consciousness space again?" Saul smiled and pointed toward the door. "Come in first. Need to take care of your body first." The two walked in and casually sat down in the tea room on the first floor. After explaining the precautions for entering the consciousness space to Brando, Saul narrowed his eyes and took out a pre-prepared scroll with the consciousness platform formation drawn on it. When Brando raised his head from the scroll and met Saul's eyes again, he found himself transported from the wizard tower to a consciousness space with starry sky overhead and a suspended circular platform underfoot. Even though this is the second time entering, I'm still incredibly shocked. Brando looked up at the starry sky and involuntarily opened his mouth wide. 30 minutes later, Brando woke up from unconsciousness. Because he had forced himself to observe Saul's consciousness space longer, he ended up directly losing consciousness. Saul immediately brought both their consciousnesses out of the consciousness space, but Brando still remained unconscious for over 20 minutes. Steward Hope brought hot tea, and Byron, upon hearing the news, also came down from upstairs. "How do you feel?" Facing the newly awakened Brando, Hope bowed slightly and offered tea. "Excellent." As soon as Brando woke up, he was full of energy. "I've found the direction to continue forward." He took the tea and gulped it down in one go, then discovered the tea base was actually mushroom. However, he had no mind to consider such things now and sincerely thanked Saul. "Although this was our transaction, I must thank you. Previously, although I ensured my safety with head-switching magic, I couldn't find any way to advance further with magical tools. Now I finally have new pursuits again." Saul wasn't as optimistic as Brando. He always felt the other party was overly excited, like he had taken stimulants. He looked back at Byron and found Byron also staring at Brando with a slight frown, seemingly also not thinking Brando's state was good. But for Brando, he had only entered another wizard's consciousness space. As long as the consciousness space's owner had no hostility toward him, he should be safe. "Just to be safe, let me check your body," Saul suggested. However, Brando shook his head and directly took his leave. "No need. I'm very clear about my physical condition. I'm just too happy. Right now my inspiration is bursting and I urgently need to conduct an experiment. I'll go back first." Unable to stop him, Saul could only watch helplessly as Brando left. He and Byron saw him off to the edge of Lake Island, watching Brando get on the wolf cart and leave. However, just as Saul was about to turn back to the tower, he suddenly noticed Brando's back of the head seemed to move. Saul quickly squinted and looked carefully, seeing Brando's helmet suddenly being pushed up by something. In the gap at the connection between Brando's neck and back of his head, a star-shaped eye suddenly opened. After opening, that eye revealed a seven-colored pupil. It looked around left and right as if seeing a new continent, though due to the angle, the colored iris could only rotate around within the eyelids. But soon, it fixed in the middle position because it saw Saul. Looking at such an eye, Saul didn't know why he felt both terrified and familiar. He raised his hand to protect his neck, as if feeling the arteries under his muscles vibrating. The blood flowing through his body was like boiling, about to surge out from his throat. "Saul," Byron placed a hand on Saul's shoulder. Saul turned back, and in a trance, he saw a familiar face on Byron's features. With another blink, the originally rushing blood had calmed down. Saul looked sideways at Brando again, but he had already entered the mushroom forest, and the eye behind him could no longer be seen clearly. "Your mental power fluctuated greatly just now. Did something happen?" "Senior, did you see the eye that popped out from behind Brando's head?" Byron pressed his lips together and was silent for a moment. "No, so, Brando really has some problems." Saul smiled bitterly. "I'm afraid it's not just some." This wasn't the first time he had seen eyeballs emerge from people who came out of his consciousness space. The last time should have been after fighting with Kent from Baton Academy in the consciousness space. The other party jumped off the platform and mysteriously died. When they came out, Kent's corpse had mutated. However, although Saul was very shocked at the time, he immediately threw this matter to the back of his mind, as if he felt it was a very ordinary thing. Not until today, when he again saw the eye with colored pupils behind Brando's head, did he recall the same mutation that happened to Kent. "This is a bit troublesome. It seems I can't casually bring people's souls into the consciousness space in the future." Saul had no way to deal with those eyes for now. He couldn't solve the mutation on Brando either and could only tell Senior Byron first. "I'm fine, but maybe I should study myself properly. The only comfort is that those things seem to have no hostility toward me." Not only no hostility, they seem to like him very much. Byron didn't rashly interfere, only saying to Saul, "If you need anything, call me." Saul smiled and nodded. In a place where neither Saul nor Byron could see, Brando had already left the mushroom forest. Outside the mushroom forest, merchant Jiajiagu happened to come deliver regular goods to Saul. Seeing the very happy Brando, he also smiled. "Seeing you so happy, I suppose the problem that troubled you for so long has been resolved." Brando nodded, "Yes. Although it's not completely resolved, at least there's a direction to work toward. What people fear most in life is wanting to work hard but not knowing how." Jiajiagu nodded in agreement. "Yes, now I don't have to worry about the pollution on my body and can run more trade routes. Thanks to Wizard Saul, he's truly the kindest and most powerful wizard I've ever met." Brando's mouth under his helmet curved into a strange arc. "Ha ha, if you're friends with Saul, then we are friends too." Jiajiagu was stunned. Why did he feel Brando's voice sounded somewhat strange just now? Chapter 640, Selection Quota. Seeing Jiajiagu staring at him in confusion, Brando strangely touched his face, only feeling the cold helmet. "Why are you staring at me? Your tone was a bit strange just now, but it's okay. Maybe you're just too happy." "Haha, maybe. Brando raised his hand to pat Jaya-Giagu's shoulder, but due to the height difference, he only patted the top of Jaya-Giagu's head. Jaya-Giagu actually disliked others touching his head, especially since that was a vital spot. He thought to himself, today's Brando is really abnormal, actually touching my head. If I could beat him, I would definitely give him a good beating. However, after Brando walked away, Jaya-Giagu touched the top of his skull and suddenly didn't find Brando's action annoying anymore. Hee, that's right, we are friends now. The corner of his mouth curved into a strange arc but quickly returned to normal. He shouldered his huge pack again and happily continued walking toward the Purity Wizard Tower. It's just that on the top of his invisible head, a crack suddenly split open, and an eye with 7 colored pupils abruptly emerged. The pupil in the center looked left and right, then squinted as if smiling. The world side of the Glare family. This was a small world where it never got dark. The Glare family members living here were either children who hadn't yet come of age, or wizards who had lost their advancement ability and exhausted their potential. Wizards who had lost advancement ability would teach gifted children or wizard apprentices here. As compensation, the family would help these End of Road clan members stabilize their spiritual bodies, preventing them from entering decline early and then suddenly mutating on some unknown day in the future. The main task of children in this world side was to become true wizards as quickly as possible. To ensure family prosperity, not every child here carried Glare bloodline. But that didn't matter. If they really encountered exceptionally outstanding talent, high-rank Glare wizards didn't mind changing the genius's bloodline. At the same time, most wizards here majored in light attribute magic. Besides bloodline reasons, it was also because there was abundant light attribute magic here. Majoring in light attribute magic meant basically never worrying about having no knowledge to learn or no seniors to ask in the future. In such a thriving place where magical culture flourished to an enviable degree, enormous crisis was hidden. The higher you fly, the harder you fall. In a pitch-black hall countless floors underground, an orange, dim light orb served as the only light source. In the center of the light orb floated what appeared to be a 2- or 3-year-old infant. He wore the simplest white robe, arms hugging his knees in a curled position. His eyes were naturally closed, his face peaceful, as if fallen into the most tranquil slumber. Below the light orb knelt an elderly man with white hair. The elder also wore simple white robes, eyes slightly narrowed, motionless. Suddenly, a ball of firelight appeared in the dim corner of the hall. The white-robed elder glanced over and raised his hand, drawing the firelight from the corner into his palm. Looking closely, it wasn't a fireball but a light shadow shaped like flames. This was also a secret communication method within the Glare family that could ensure communication secrecy and accuracy. Even the Stargate Council, where the Glare family belonged, didn't know about this method. Therefore, only a few high-rank core wizards in the family mastered this technique. After reading the light orb, the white-robed elder looked up at the infant floating in midair and said, "Gorsa killed Clark." The infant still kept his eyes closed, but the corners of his mouth slightly turned up. So I said, "We don't need to make any moves." The infant's body emitted an extremely aged voice, like an old man on his deathbed. Just from the voice, he sounded even older than the elder kneeling on the ground. The 4th rank lost by the Glare family must be filled by the Glare family itself. This infant actually said the same words as Gorsa. However, the elder on the ground showed a sad expression. "Lord Norton, you really. Parker, as wizards, we must respect facts." "Yes." The white-robed elder lowered his head, but sadness remained in his eyes. "But is Gorsa really the right choice? You know his ideals are different from yours and all previous family generations. He might lead the Glare family to destruction. The fourth-rank wizard in infant form, the Glare family patriarch Norton, was silent for a moment. The end of my and our ancestors' path is also destruction. Perhaps Gorsa's choice will open a new path. Moreover, Parker, without my restraint, none of you can stop him. Parker bent down, pressing his head directly against the rough ground. Although he was already an enviably powerful third-rank wizard outside, the family's future gave him a constant sense of powerlessness. All right, don't waste time on meaningless matters. Parker, go notify Corey and have her go to the borderland to prepare for third-rank advancement. The Glare family head didn't want to discuss matters that already had conclusions with Parker, instead bringing up new arrangements for the borderland. However, hearing Norton's instructions, Parker straightened up, his eyes showing some helplessness and tension. My lord, Gorsa has also recommended a candidate for third-rank advancement. And Norton was silent for a moment, seeming unaccustomed to someone proposing different suggestions before him. Who? A student he took on Stat Continent named Saul. Although Norton cared about Gorsa, he didn't care about things Gorsa cared about. So this was his first time hearing Saul's name. Saul, Parker said carefully. That young wizard is not yet 20 years old but is already a second-rank wizard. His talent is quite amazing. It's just that he entered second rank less than a year ago. I don't think highly of Gorsa's choice. That might waste one opportunity to use the door-opening materials. Norton chuckled lightly. Don't you understand his personality yet? If we directly deny his proposal, he'll kill the person we propose. Parker frowned, but that would be someone you appointed. No matter how crazy he is. However, Parker soon remembered that Gorsa had already directly killed the next fourth-rank wizard designated by the Stargate Council chairman. Killing a second-rank wizard probably wouldn't be difficult either, even if it meant defying the family head's orders. If he really cared about the family head's orders, he wouldn't have been essentially exiled for conducting dark attribute magic experiments at second rank. But no one expected that even though exile caused his third-rank advancement to be delayed by decades, this man still completed advancement through his own efforts. And he was quite a powerful existence among senior third-rank wizards. Tell Gorsa that Saul can participate in the selection trial. Also tell him that besides Corey, Alec will definitely send candidates too. Let him consider his little apprentice's life and death himself.